Okay, so welcome everybody. This is who we are going to have for our committee tonight. We are down a Peter and down a Danielle, but we are going to push forward. It is now 7:03, so I will call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order and let you all know that any votes taken tonight will be done by a roll call vote and that this meeting is being recorded. So please take care not to put anything on your screen that you do not want captured by that recording. Okay, we have tonight, we are going to try to get through quite a bit of special town meeting articles. I'm hoping we can do some voting. I'm hoping we can finish assigning some comments and so that we will hopefully get as much done by next week as we can. I have obviously mentioned to Greg, we may not have finished comments and recommendations because things have been a little late. They're also, down in admin, and it's just been one of those town meetings where some things are still in flux. So we'll do the best we can. And if not, worst case scenario, we have to hand out a piece of paper at town meeting. So getting started, we have DPW Director Justin DeMarco here with us to talk about the water enterprise budget amendment, the sewer enterprise budget amendment, the treatment plant borrowing, and then we're also going to use his expertise a little bit on the speed limit article, and he was also willing to talk to us a little bit about the CPC article if we would like, and a little bit about how the trash contract changed just in terms of how it impacted our budget. So I want to be clear tonight that there's going to be a lot of trash talk, everybody, in the next couple of years. Tonight is not the night that we are going to completely flesh out everything about our trash collection and how it works and where it's going moving forward. Tonight's talk is mostly about special town meeting, the budget, in terms of what happened, that contract, how it increased the budget. So that's what Justin is here to talk about. We will certainly have a lot more to say about trash coming up soon, because that is going to be a hot topic for sure. But I just want to make that clear because we have a lot to do for a special town meeting tonight. Okay, so without further ado, I will share my screen so that you all can see. We can be looking at the actual draft warrant. Thank you for sending that out, Greg. Let me pull that up, and I will go right to. Can everyone see that? I'll make it a little bigger. Okay, so this is, unfortunately, it's split pages a little bit, but this is Article 2 at the moment. These may change. The order of these may change. This is just the draft. It hasn't gone through town moderator, etc. But for now, this is what we'll go with. So this is Article 2, amend the Water Enterprise Fund budget. And
did you sent this out, and if so, what version are you talking about?
I believe I sent the draft warrant today, right? Greg, you just gave it to me today, right?
I just made it today, and there's only one version, so
yeah,
you got it.
So I think what we got, I just piping in, Ken, I think the attachment that I saw with the one we got was just a summary of
The article list.
Yeah.
I sent the article list, but I thought, did it not come through the full?
Let me check. I'll check.
Sorry,
No,
I thought, okay.
I'm not saying it.
I thought they forwarded together.
Yeah,
all right, I will forward that, but for now, if you want to, you can hop on board docs. This is on our meeting tonight under the second agenda item, special town meeting. I put it there. So Justin, do you want to start us off on this one?
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you. I don't get to see the FinCom that often. It's usually once or twice a year, but it's always a pleasure. So what we have in front of us is we have two enterprise fund budget amendments. but we'll start with the water, which in progression is first. What we're looking at is a budget amendment to the FY23 already approved budget. The budget amendment is based off of some recent collective bargaining union contracts that were recently resolved. It's actually a combination of multiple collective bargaining units, DPW laborers, department head, and actually DPW director's contract as it's finalized. So what you have in front of you is pretty much an amendment. Now, we're not looking for an addition to the budget. We're just amending the current already approved budget to accommodate for the salary increases, the compensation increases. So what you're seeing is a salary increase on the water salaries line of $6,000. And then you're seeing what under expenses, indirect costs. And if the FinCom's not fully aware of how indirect costs are translated, I know there's some new members. Indirect costs are costs that are paid out of the enterprise fund for departments that assist the water and sewer utility, specifically in this one, the water utility. So take the treasurer collector's office, when they collect bills, that time that they do that is calculated, and there's an offset expense that comes out of the enterprise fund to pay for portions of the salaries, health insurance, benefits, etc. So what you're seeing is an increase of $6,000 under water salaries. That is your traditional on-site staff. The shared employees cost under expenses, indirect cost, is a combination of all the departments that assist that were currently modified due to collective bargaining. And then what we're doing is we're shifting the costs from our water capital to our salaries and employee cost line. So we're not looking for a budget increase. We're just looking for a budget adjustment.
And Justin, why do you have to?
I'm sorry, Alana.
Sorry, go ahead. Why do you have to, if the bottom line isn't changing, this has to go to town meeting voters because it's a certain amount, or do you have to, like, you cannot even change a dollar? I'm just wondering.
So typically journal expenses or journal transfers, what the FinCom may be used to, can be expense lines, but you cannot change salary lines to expense lines without the meeting vote. So it's because we're increasing the overall salary lines and taking it and shifting it from what our traditional expense or capital lines. If this was an expense to an expense, let's say, I'll just give one quick example. Our expense line for chemical treatments wasn't enough due to the economic market. We could do an internal transfer of another expense line that may have excess funds, but it's a salaries line, so that has to be approved by town meeting. And this is literally a replication of the sewer, so they're one and the same. It's just because we have two different enterprise funds and employees are split 50-50. So if you look at the next one, which is sewer, it's going to look almost exactly the same in regards to what that is. The difference between a shared employee costs on sewer versus shared employee costs on water is because the wastewater treatment plant doesn't have an indirect cost aspect. So there's a little reduction, like the sewer is smaller than your indirect costs for water. So that's the difference.
And what is not going to happen in the capital, or like you're taking it out of capital? What is that repercussion?
So as you are aware from previous conversations, but again, we're speaking to some newer FinCom members, there was a large shift about 3 years ago where we put capital opportunity costs into our operating budget, thus forcing the department or the town as a whole to actually invest in small term capital. It's actually like a forced mechanism, which is a great thing because it allows us to actually catch up on our infrastructure that sometimes gets weighed out due to other aspects or other issues that arise. It is a formula that's been tried and true, and actually we've had a lot of success over the past 3 years with smaller capital projects that you're seeing transpire across the community. Gate replacements, sewer pump station replacements, things like that, that smaller term, which never got captured before. So if you actually were able to look at the overall budgets, under sewer capital, this is like a reduction of 5%. So it's not a significant issue. $13,000, don't get me wrong, $13,000 is a lot for us as a laissez, like everyday person. My personal budget, that's a lot of money. When you're talking about capital and what that looks like for projects, it's very insignificant. If this was a $50, $100, $200,000 shift, I would say we may be losing a capital project within that operating budget for that fiscal year. But this is something that we can adjust on the fly without actually interfering with our yearly approach for our capital projects. And I would say that's for both water and sewer at this point.
Okay. Kevin, go ahead.
Yes. So I'm just curious. So what would be your intent to sort of take this $13,000 out of? Would it be just a slight reduction in capital planning? Like, where is this $13,000 going to come out of in terms of our capital spend?
So each enterprise fund has dedicated capital lines. So I know it's hard because you're only looking at the controls. And I'm not sure if you've seen expense reports under our water and sewer, but specifically we'll take sewer. It's in front of us right now. We have capital improvement line and it's $50,000. That would be reduced by 13. We also have capital reserve line, which is actually a buffer zone. So if we had a capital project that was over 50,000 that was identified, let's just say 60, the reserve would fund the other 10,000. But the reserve is actually a built-in mechanism for our retained earnings. And our retained earnings are end overall, like the general fund budget, it's free cash for the enterprise fund.
Okay.
So we try not to aim for capital reserves. We would take this out of the capital improvement line. And then we would reduce that planning. And most of the time, Kevin, like I said, is depending on the significance of it, it may adjust that. But we're talking about that capital improvement line. Specifically, I'll take sewer because it's in front of us again, is we're talking about the potential of replacing 2 pumps with 1 pump. And we have like 8 to 10 sewer pump stations, and each one has anywhere between 1 and 5 pumps in it. So these aren't failures, because failures may come out of expense lines where there is maintenance repair lines. These are improvements where end of life is coming and we want to be proactive on it. So that's one of those situations where we're not looking to pass the buck per se, but we are potentially moving things down the line. But based on these costs, we're not necessarily seeing an impact on capital improvements.
And I suppose like the things you're moving are, not at the tail end of their life. Like there's not a high risk of a catastrophic failure.
Correct. Those are, if you actually are looking at those enterprise funds, Kevin, we have unforeseen lines. Those are in case we have a sewer break or a water main break. And those typically are $75,000 funded every year. And those are our kind of break glass in case of emergency, things that we can't predict, where if we had a huge water main break on Main Street, we're hitting the unforeseen line. And at that point, say it's over 75, we built in reserve funds in both enterprise funds in the water and sewer to also handle that, so that we're not going to town meeting every time we have an emergency. So we're trying to get to a point where we can be reactive in a significant timeline for public safety, public health, so that we can kind of get ahead of that. Our capital improvement lines are more of a proactive approach. We're playing catch up, but we're also trying to also be proactive in our assets. And that's kind of that balance.
All right. Thank you for that very informative explanation. You did a very good job. You're a very good teacher. I don't know if you ever consider a career like teaching infrastructure, but you did a very good job explaining this finance to me.
No problem. Actually, I used to be a TA in a lot of my classes in undergrad. So I actually really did help the professor quite often. It's just not a lucrative career, and I can't see myself constantly doing that. So I need to be in the action a little bit.
Are there any other questions on the water or sewer adjustments? Okay. Then we will.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to get myself off mute.
Go ahead, Jillian.
It just has to be 2 separate articles because it's 2 separate funds, or is it twice the amount? I got a little confused.
Sorry. Yeah, Jillian, the reason that it's 2 separate, I know that like Jillian's been on for a while, and there was a point where we were looking to combine the enterprise funds. I don't know if the committee remembers that, but technically we never moved forward with that. There was some constraints and some turnovers from Mike Guzzo to Lori, and it's actually a harder process than you would think. So at this point, it's because each enterprise fund is a separate enterprise fund, and that's why there's 2 articles. Now, I know we're still looking towards a long-term combined enterprise fund, which would allow for this to be one article in the future.
But they are to your other point, Jillian, they are two different amounts.
Correct.
It is a combined change of this 13,867 and 14,477.
Yeah, so that's what I indicated. The reason that difference is based off that indirect cost analysis. What certain department heads do for water, they may not do for sewer, etc. So remember that we had like a indirect cost analysis and we presented that to the board, the select board, and it was an offset and it changed some of the calculations and now the enterprise fund happened. That analysis puts together the percentage of certain departments, certain staff, that what they do and what they assist for each separate utility.
Right. Natasha, I see your
Awesome,
hand up.
thank you.
Yeah, this may be just grammatical, but it says total FY22 budget for under the expense total.
Right
Big
here?
bold. Yeah, should that say 23?
Oh, good catch. That is correct.
I think
we
it's
need to
on
make
both
that
of them.
Noted. Yes.
Thanks, Natasha.
Yeah, we can make that edit. What ends up happening is we're going off of the annual pre-control from the annual town meeting, and that's that. I appreciate that. We can get that edited tomorrow.
All right. Gonna move on then to the borrowing authorization for well 4A treatment plant. And also just a reminder that on board docs 2, there is a, oh no, sorry, that memo's about solid waste, just kidding. I thought there was one about this too.
There should be a memo. Well, the memo may be consistent with the recent contract approval by the select board for well 4A's phase 1, but it does kind of go into a little detail there if you want to look at that. If it's not on board docs, I'm sure I can send it off to the committee to.
I think that one is still on select board. But we do have the cost estimate.
Yeah.
I have that.
The memo that we're referring to, just for the committee's understanding, was actually based off phase 1, and I kind of hit some phase 2 points on it, why it's phased out, why the project is broken out into 2 at this point. But what we're looking at in front of you, and some committee members have been around long enough to understand where we're at with our water capacity, and I know there's also some new committee members. So I'm going to give like a high holistic of where we're at with water, and then kind of break it down to why we're at this phase 1, phase 2 process. So about 3 years ago, we presented a water capacity memo to the planning board, select board, and I believe FinCom was a joint meeting at that one time when we presented the overall constraints of the community when we're talking about water capacity. For the committee members who aren't aware, the town of Maynard is a siloed utility. And when I say siloed utility, we draw our own raw water, we treat it, and we produce it, and we do not have the ability to get water from anything else except for our own processes, our own assets. We have 3 treatment plants, and each treatment plant has multiple well fields. Some have more than others, some are bigger producers than others, but just for general purposes, we have 3 water treatment plants that feed a distribution network of about, we serve about 98 to 99% of Maynard residents as our customer base. Within that process, we are at a constraint. We're at a point within our utility where we can only, if you took a straw to this water cup, we can only suck up so much water from the ground and treat it to give and produce water to our utility customers. So what we've been working on, and this has actually been over the course of almost 8 years, is identifying new raw water sources. So ground wells are wells that we drill and we pump water out of, or surface water, where some of the committee members are fully aware that we own a surface water asset called White's Pond. It happens to be in Sudbury, but we do have one surface water asset and we have multiple ground well sources. So well 4A, and I'm sure that you continually hear that, is actually a new ground well source. And when you identify new ground well sources, there's an extreme amount of permitting through the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. And sometimes that impacts other authorities like EPA and Natural Heritage, which is an animal protection asset and authority. So well 4A, where it's located, is actually behind Maynard Crossing. And it actually is kind of behind the high school a little bit, and it's in a swamp area. Well 4A is a new source, and with that, going through the DEP permitting process typically takes anywhere between 3 and 5 years. But while that process was identified, there was also an impact to Blanding turtle habitat, which is an endangered species in Massachusetts, which actually lengthened the permitting time. Not only did we have to look at, water withdrawals and its impact to the aquifers, but we also had to look at natural breeding habitat for the Blanding turtle. And we had to put this and compile this data to allow for approval. And when we receive approval, we receive it on the back of Mass DEP and our current 20-year withdrawal permit. So it's an amendment of our 20-year withdrawal permit. They also identify what is allowed to come out of the ground. So this might be the actual water in the ground, but DEP can limit us to only take this much. And that's based off of a lot of analytical data and recharge rates, etc. So we've crossed all those hurdles. But while you're planning financially through those long dynamic projects, this isn't even engineering and asset management and how the design and development of the actual asset works as well, is it's hard sometimes to financially get yourself in a good position. And we worked diligently over the past 3 years to really start to kind of reduce the peaks and valleys in our water and sewer rates, where we go with 0, 0, 0, and then a 30% rate increase. We try to forecast our financial models. And with that, we also try to forecast what our borrowing is. We build in the long-term borrowing so that we're not going, hey, we need $70 million and X is going to cost Y, and now we need a 50% rate increase to accommodate that. We've been working very proactively in trying to utilize our rates for our current needs, our past repair needs, and for future forecasting for financing, so that we're kind of solving the old problems while proactively looking forward. So unfortunately, this is a situation where we as a town had a project that during its timeline and approval process that happened to land at a point where the economic market went crazy. So when we bid this project out, we bid it out, and we typically bid construction projects with what's called a financial contingency of anywhere between 10 and 15%. That's industry standard. That's been industry standard for 20, 30 years. We bid this out with that contingency in place, only to see some of the bids come in almost 50%. It was anywhere between 30 and 40% over was our low bids, but we've seen some almost reach 50% over our anticipated estimated costs. Now, when we estimate projects like this is the estimates are provided by technical estimators in the field. This isn't Justin DeMarco saying, hey, I think we need $5 million, and then we just put it forward. These design plans are thoroughly vetted through estimators that do this type of work across the country, typically perform this type of design work. And unfortunately, the market is just where it is and where it kind of fell when it came to our bid process. Now, traditionally, if we didn't need this water source like yesterday, we would potentially look at, okay, let's see where the market goes and kind of like play this out and rebid it. But as you saw from the extreme drought conditions, the water bans, and actually my plea towards the water bans and the non-essential use is we're literally at the breaking point with our water utility. We are, as we've stated over 3 years ago in our memo, we are one pump failure away from not being able to turn faucets on it in all your homes. This is a dangerous game we're playing, and we can't keep playing it. So obviously identifying this project and moving it forward is vital to the community, current utility users, and the potential for long-term growth. So moving the project forward, we reconvened after we received bids that were well above our appropriations and our allowances, and we phased the project out into 2 phases. So if you look at it, some of my comments, you'll see a phase 1 and a phase 2. So the borrowing that's currently in front of you for the potential for special town meeting is phase 2. Phase 1 is fully funded from our previous $1 million bond, $1.5 million bond, and the ARPA appropriation that we received from the select board. That project was recently bid out, and we received bids in our estimated price range, and select board recently just approved contract, and we'll move on phase 1. The reason we phased it out the way we did with phase 1 and phase 2, we really focused on those permits. Remember when I said we had all these permit approvals? those sunset. So we didn't want to lose those because that would be 8 years in the making. So phase one in the appropriation that we already received is fully on all the permitted activities and processes. So that is under contract, that will get underway and will actually safe in regards to the permit process. Phase two, so take those ground well sources. So you're talking about a straw in the ground pumping out water. Those get piped to a treatment facility because we're pumping raw swamp water. You wouldn't drink this. It has to be treated chemically to meet water quality standards, and that's done through our treatment facility. When you put on a new source, the previous treatment, especially when you're modifying a previous design treatment plant, one, it was designed to handle the previous wells that are still under operation. So its capacity to handle a new source isn't there. And two, the new source has different raw water qualities. So adaptation of innovations, chemical treatment or mechanical treatment all have to be adapted and then integrated to our current facility, our current wells, plus our new wells, and all has to be modularly adapted. What you're looking for phase two, or what we're looking for right now, is actually the completion of the modifications for treatment processes in our current facility so that we can actually withdraw our new well source, treat it, and put it into our distribution network. Now, if we don't see this project or the borrowing capacity approved, we're actually going to have wells that are drilled, piping that goes nowhere, meaning it doesn't go into our system. It will get all the way to the treatment facility, but we can't actually withdraw it and we can't treat. So this is a vital component to move forward. And sometimes I know it seems like, hey, you know, we thought this whole project was under one umbrella, and it was. The original plan was under one umbrella. This is a adaptation to the current market and the current economic situation, and also weighing Maynard's needs. So unfortunately, well 4A was always designed to handle Maynard Crossing. And unfortunately, Maynard Crossing is being built out and we're not there yet. So we're actually going backwards, and our capacity study is actually going in the opposite direction. We have more demand than we ever had, and yet our capacity that was planned isn't there yet. So the vital component here is to making sure that we move this forward and get this project done, because this project was always identified to handle Maynard Crossing and all of that. So when you hear, hey, if we get this project done, can we develop over here? My recommendation is still, it needs to be measured. It needs to be weighed. Each project on what I like to call a medium to high level development needs to be thoroughly vetted, because this was always meant for Maynard Crossing. And we really need to, we're playing catch up.
Okay.
I hope that was high enough level.
Yep.
But we can
Nope,
get in more detail.
that was great. I have just a couple quick questions. One, this 5 million bonding will be seen by the residents through their water sewer bills or through their,
Yes, but
yeah.
not in the current. So if you go back to the water FY23 budget adjustments and amendments, if you notice, there isn't an amendment to the water and sewer enterprise funds for this bonding, because we won't have to pay this bonding until next fiscal year, and we may be able to defer that payment. That's something that internally will develop. But yes, there will be a rate increase to accommodate for this, but there always was going to be, whether it was this project or the next. So
I just wanted to be sure people understood which bill they were going to see this on, not their real estate tax bill. This is a water sewer.
100% funded under, and they'll see it actually under their water rates, not their sewer rates.
Okay.
And we will work diligently to make sure that, again, like our financial forecast model isn't a peak. I don't want to peak this. And there is multiple ways that we can kind of make sure that we lessen the blow and spread it out a little bit so that we're moving forward without hitting the wallets too much, to a point where, one, we're not the only ones dealing with the economic market. We understand our customers are too. And we understand inflation is beyond reproach at this point. Unfortunately, we also understand the importance of public safety and public health in regards to potable water within your system. And we just want to make sure that that high priority is moving forward, and we're hedging ourselves from failure. And that's what we need to look at this point. And we'll diligently, the best way to describe that is some of the committee may have seen the presentation in last FY23's water and sewer rates presentation, where we put together a 5-year forecast model for the future of OMR, phase 2 of our water capacity, where we said we're going to start to build a 5-year financial model so that when we go towards a modification of Old Marlboro Road's treatment facility for our long-term games, we're looking at not doing nothing and then having a 20, 30, 40% spike. We were starting to build in that financial model. This just moves that can a little bit. It doesn't mean Old Marlboro isn't there. We're just going to kind of eat a little bit of this in the front end of that 5-year financial forecast, and then we're going to push Old Marlboro off. So we still have a nice steady peak. Now, there is indications that there may be future federal or state grants that may be able to help us offset some of OMR's permitting, but nothing that can help us with this right now. ARPA has already been dedicated to phase.
Right.
All right. So I do have some questions, if
Okay, go ahead.
that's okay with the chair. So my first question is, so I recall there was a separate well that you just recently discovered last year, correct? Okay,
That is
this is
correct.
this is not covering that well, because I seem to recall you saying that well gets us the ability to fill the mill. This well gets us the ability for the former digital campus. I'm trying to remember the
Yeah, Maynard Crossing.
Maynard
Yep.
Crossing. Yeah.
Yep, you're right, Kevin, and that is 100% correct. Now, remember when I said the permitting process, though, for well, like our current well 4A, what you're seeing in front of you, when I said 3 to 5 years, and this actually took longer due to other implications, the landing turtles. So when we talk about OMR, I caution the board, and I said, pump the brakes. I have good news, but take a step back for a second. That process will still take 3 to 5 years of permitting, and it will actually take financing to move the permitting process forward. Right now, we don't have any. We were going to potentially use any of the excess ARPA off of this project to kind of move that forward, but unfortunately, we had to take all ARPA, 1.5 million, and now a future 5 million. So OMR is kind of that new well source is just at the infancy stages and it's stuck. So we don't have any finances to move that forward. We have reached out to our, state legislators to kind of look for other sources, grant, things of that nature to kind of move that ball. But at this point right now, this is the known. So well 4A treatment is the known instant commodity in our system, and it needs to be focused on, and then moving to OMR is our next step.
And I guess just shortly, I mean, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but why is this project preferable to White Pond?
So White's Pond comes at an extreme price tag, and I'll give you a really high level, but we can go on to that in many details.
I kind of knew the answer, but I had to ask.
So there's a lot of variable hurdles. So White's Pond 3 years ago was $40 million. That was $40 million without PFAS treatment. It has been identified to be over the threshold for PFAS, which is a chemical substance that is you're hearing across headlines, national news, state news, things of that nature. So that would exponentially drive that treatment plant process up by another 30 to 50%. And there's also other variables. There's a transmission line that feeds that pond that goes through the Federal Wildlife Reserve to the town of Maynard, and we don't have a legal binding agreement and an easement. And that would take years in court and a lot of money that wasn't identified. And thirdly, it is already a permitted source of water under our Water Act, and it actually only allows for 1 million gallons. So pretend this cup is 1 million gallons. It's only allowed to pump 1 million gallons, even if it can hold more. Remember when I said, if the water's here, they may limit us to here, meaning Mass DEP. Old Marlboro Road with the new well source and our previous well source taken offline because the raw water and the treatment plant couldn't actually jive. The new well source and that old well equal 1.5 million gallons of potential withdrawal at an estimated cost of about half of White's Pond. So that's just really high level, but that is the simplistic nature of, we already have a permitted well source that's 500,000 gallons that we just need to modify our treatment plant to treat. And we have a new well source that is adjacent to it on property that the town of Maynard owns, no easement agreements, no private property ownership, that we just need to get through the 3 to 5 year permit process and adapt our treatment plant to handle the new source the raw water quality issues that if anybody lives in the Old Marlboro Road area, so Old Marlboro Road, Tobin, understands that the water sometimes gets brown, doesn't get brown activity. You may hear it. It's on Facebook. I know sometimes when you're not in that area or you don't live there, you don't understand the quality of water that sometimes a third of your community deals with. But there's a real dying issue. Our treatment plant is dying. The raw water is drastically changing, and the plant that's currently there has a lot of trouble treating it properly. So sometimes there's that situation that pops itself up every once in a while. We have purple water, we have brown water. That's what that means. The treatment plant is dying and it can't handle the raw water quality. So OMR, phase 2 of our 4-phase water capacity improvement program is actually a focus on adaptation and modification of the current facility to reinstitute our 500,000 gallon already permitted well, and to encompass the new well that is estimated to produce 1 million gallons.
Okay.
And when you hear me say that's the solution for long-term Maynard, that is the solution for long-term Maynard. Phase 2 of our 4-phase actually conceptually produces the most water capacity out of all 4 phases.
So yeah, I really look forward to that victory dance when it comes, because that is a huge victory.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
At that point, my operators aren't working 24/7 all day, every day, and they're going to be the happiest group of individuals. And at the end of the day, you also have equipment not stressing itself. So when we're talking about proactive approaches, when you want to, increase the life of a facility, not operating those mechanical issues on a 24/7, 365 way actually reduces long-term cost. And that's us getting over that proverbial proactive versus reactive approach.
But I think the message for this article is that this article we need because we are, as you said, one pump failure away from your taps not working. So we are on the precipice of a catastrophic failure. We have to do this. This is the cheapest option. White Pond is exorbitantly more expensive. This is the cheapest option to solve that issue. However, there's also the light at the end of the tunnel, which is the Old Marlboro Road well source. And I look forward to talk to you about that more. But I think for the purposes of this article, we just have to limit it to say, like, yeah, we're at the precipice of catastrophic failure now, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We are getting out of this.
Yeah, I will tell you, I'm not going to lie, Kevin, when we found that well source, sometimes when you're in the public sector, as long as I have been, sometimes it's very hard to find solutions. The solution's there. Now it's how do we get it? And we can get there. We can get there in a thorough approach, a controlled approach, and I definitely believe it's there. So
great. And Justin, one more quick question. This gets appropriated in October, and then how long is your timeline looking before well 4A is like up and running, getting treated, getting into people's houses?
So we had a conversation today, internal meeting about, if this gets approved, what's our next steps? I'm looking to bond this out the next day. We are already developed a bid package for phase 2, and we are looking at bid openings prior to special town meeting in case the bids come crazy. So that if we had to, I could remove this, I could ask for this to be removed on town meeting floor. Let's just say the bids come in at $10 million. We need to take a step back. And we could pull that. And we've proactively put ourselves at bid opening prior to special town meeting. And at that point, it also, let's just say, hypothetically, it comes in at lowest bid at 5.5 million. We may need to make an adjustment on the fly. And are we prepared for that? I am. I'm prepared to present bid documentation with real cost and a contract opportunity of why it is X. Now, do I anticipate that? No. We did a lot more due diligence in regards to our contingencies. We put in contingencies of 20, 25%, and we have buffers in place within our operating budget, reserve funds, things of that nature to kind of handle that $100,000, $200,000 fluctuation range. So we're very confident that the $5 million will be able to capture phase 2, and we're actually looking to piggyback the projects. So remember when I said one's a facility and one's the piping to get in, these can actually work hand in hand, even if it's two different contractors. One can actually be done simultaneous as the other. It was originally a total scope project, and we had to phase it out based off of bidding and available funding. Our anticipation and our deadline is really our goal here for the contractors of both phase 1 and phase 2 is to online the water source late spring, early summer. Now there's still authority that comes into play here. So you build it, and then DEP has to evaluate it before they give the okay to pump it into your water system. So depending on DEP's timeline, that could go in one direction, but our goal is to make sure that we get ahead of the next summer. We can't keep going at summers that we're going at this point. Now, does that mean that we're not going to have, if we had a drought next year, does that mean we're not going to implement non-essential outdoor water use? Absolutely not. That's here to stay, and people need to get used to it. Unfortunately,
that's not from us. That's from Mass DEP. So
yes, there's a lot of factors there. It's because it's shared aquifers. So when we pump our water source, you know, we have one straw in there, and I'm using this little cup as a quick example, but we have one straw. So doesn't Sudbury, so doesn't Concord, so doesn't Acton under this one aquifer. And then DEP balances that aquifer, and they look at it as a basin. And unfortunately, it crosses property lines. It just is what it is. So sometimes we're at the mercy of all of this as a society within the state pumping from certain basins that don't have recharge like others. So if you ever see the drought map that Massachusetts puts on, you'll see like Western Mass never hits drought status. But then you're in the city, always hits it first. Boston, areas like that is because the dense urban environment, the demand at the resources at that level, and it's also based off the utility. MWRA services Boston, and the Quabbin is actually out in Western Mass, and the pipe network goes all the way to Boston and hits a lot of communities on its travels. We don't have that ability. We're an isolated utility. So we're at the mercy of the aquifer system and the basins in our area that we withdraw from.
Natasha, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. It was just, it might be a clarifying question about generally, I know there's a lot of factors and votes and allocations for these phases that have gone through. And I'm wondering if where Joe Q Public might be able to just see that timeline. I know there's a lot of different reports posted, and it might be helpful to direct folks to see where we are in that planning, kind of to piggyback off of what Alana was asking about, because I was looking at some other information and it said that well 4A, I guess at one point was anticipated to be online last fall. So it'd be good to get some updated information if possible about like what the allocations have gone through, how that is evolving the past couple of years since that 2020 presentation if possible.
So I can speak to that a little bit. So the recent memo that you heard me and Alana kind of talk about in regards to the recent contract approval of select board, I actually, in that memo, there's the appropriation of each fund that funds the phase 1. So the 1.5 million, the 1 million, and the ARPA funds. And it kind of just gives the calendar year in which those take place. If you actually go down to my comments within this article, you'll see that I kind of break it down with phase 1 is appropriated through these 3 situations: bonding, and ARPA. Now, I could write a Bible in regards to the comments, but they also need to be concise. I mean, that's sometimes you're playing that back and forth role of how much information can you provide. I could write a 10-page synopsis on this project alone, but is that going to capture the essence of it? So I will tell you that in regards to well 4A, I did kind of identify that there's certain factors that came into play of why it was broken down to phase 1 and phase 2. And I feel like I hit that. Now, that's me as the writer and the author. And I get that sometimes the author may not necessarily look at it as somebody that's reading it. So if there are suggestions and you want to look at my comments and you believe that we need to kind of adapt that, I sometimes also believe that, you know, in the past, I think Ken's done a great job where FinCom kind of puts it in that more concise process, where our sponsor comments as the department heads are a little bit more technical. But again, I'm amenable to anything. So if
I
we believe
was really thinking more about not necessarily on the warrant article, but something, for instance, I know that they have projects where you can put for, was it ClearGov? And so you have these long-term projects that they've had and you can put timelines in there, something to that effect where, because this is spanning multiple fiscal years and there've been so many different actions in that period of time of either town budget allocation or bonding or ARPA funds. I just thinking that at some point it might be helpful to have like a living place that's, as these actions are happening or delayed, for folks to go back and reference to, because there's a lot of info. Like you said, it can be dense. And I don't think you're going to be able to capture all that in one article. I'm just thinking that next spring meeting, we're going to also be talking about other, borrowing. And so just to keep that at the forefront of some conversations, they understand the town's fiscal health as a whole.
So Natasha, I think that's a great idea. Our current ClearGov, I don't believe is under our contract, but I can't speak to that because it's not a DPW contract. But I think that's a great idea. You see that in a lot of cities. The reason cities put those projects out there is, one, they pump out projects at 10 times the rate as we do. And typically they also have a stronger financial background where ClearGov, they utilize those systems because you do have to pay for those things. But I would, if you guys as stakeholders are looking for something like that, I would definitely push that forward. I think there would be huge benefits for the Department of Public Works in regards to projects that span multiple fiscal years. Because if typically Public Works, and I would say 90% of the community within the town of Maynard, Public Works has projects that span multiple fiscal years, where most other departments do not. And that would benefit the Department of Public Works wholeheartedly, moving long-term dynamic projects forward. And we actually do have on the horizon a lot of long-term dynamic projects that need consistency in moving forward. So I would be happy to explore that. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. And I just only suggest that because, people tend to react for one action sometimes, and we see this play out on social media. It's like, oh, this, but then it's part of a larger plan. And so to get that accurate information, it'd be really great, something that they could, like, this is part of this step, and this is where we planned that 5 years ago or 3 years ago, however. And this is where things needed to change, and the allocation and how that allocation. So again, I just was suggesting, because I know we're doing a lot of borrowing in the next year or so, and might help the cause.
No, that's absolutely true. And the
At least-
finance committee has talked about making sure when we go to town meeting and in our comments and our presentations and whatnot, that we put things into the bigger picture to help town meeting voters, because you're right. It can be either confusing when you think you've already, didn't we already do something for 4A or whatever? And it also, you can think like, yeah, this sounds good. But not have an idea that like, it's going to be this, and it's also going to be Green Meadow, and it's going to be this in the next, 2 fiscal years. So,
and I also think that we are probably the most informed, because we talk about these budget things. Some person may, once or twice a year look at their, where's the money going, right, at town meeting or whatever.
Right.
And so it just would be, again, just the thought that these large allocations, showing them where, because they hear about them. And for me, even though I'm like, wait, I remember we talked about it, and it kind of goes back to, then you have to dig a lot, and then you lose people's attention pretty easy.
I will tell you, I know it's rudimentary, but part of our website is a little rudimentary in Maynard. A lot of this information that you're referring to, Natasha, is actually under the water and sewer page of the DPW. At least all the memos, PDFs aspect. Now, is it in a streamline, like right click, swipe right, easily accessible? No, but that's the rudimentary part of our current website. But the information is there, and you're not wrong. It's not easy to get to. But we do try to do our best within our constraints to make sure the information is there and viable the best that we can within our platforms.
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, I think your page is helpful, Justin. There is, but I think the latest, like
I was looking at something at like, and I love the memos, but I was reading about the well 4A at fall, and then someone who hasn't been keeping up, they're like, oh, well, if we approve this and F1 supposed to be open, and what happened, and so that's just where it'd be great to have those opportunities to put in all the things that you're talking about. Keeps it current.
Draw the lines together, keep the thread. Yep.
Yeah, and we don't put controls on there until they become articles. And sometimes we don't even put articles on there because they're already at town meeting by the time they become articles. Typically, the best information that we have is the memo. And then if you notice with some of my memos, I always hit back. So like when I asked the select board for approval of phase 1, if you look at that memo, I know it's stuck in board docs and I can definitely pass along. I actually always try to give a high level of, hey, phase 2 is coming down the line. So not only am I asking for this, just know this is coming, and a teaser so that we start to have that construction conversation in advance. But platform constraints, technology, but it's out there. And I believe as stakeholders, if that's what you guys want to move forward, have those constructive conversations with all the appropriate authorities, and then maybe the prioritization of funding to help with that process is put in place.
All right, are there any other questions on what is currently Article 7? Okay. So while we still have Justin here with us, we'll touch quickly on the CPC ask, because Justin, are you the project manager of Marble Farm Park?
Yeah,
Technically?
I'm not the applicant. David Mark.
No, I
local
know that,
resident,
yeah.
the applicant. Yep. So DPW typically is always the project manager of CPCs. Now, I wouldn't say 100%. When it's on authority that falls under the DPW or the select board, we tend to be the project manager. And as you know, like there's a lot of property under the select board, and that goes to the DPW manager, facilities manager, so it kind of wraps in the DPW as a whole. Sometimes those CPC projects are also on school property. So take Keenan softball, and that's the project coordinator is actually the superintendent's office for that said project. This happens to be under select board. So the DPW is the project coordinator and project manager in regards to making sure we meet procurement, Mass General Law, bid, scope, design. That's our expertise. So we're assisting David Mark moving his project forward, and CPC as a whole. So recently we fell into, this is another project that is sadly in the time that we bid it falls in line with economic crazy, and the bid came back extraordinary. So we had to rescope the project, limit some of the design scope as a whole so that we can bid it out under our current approved and appropriated funding. We're at the point where we just received bids, and the bids are just under the appropriation, which allows us zero wiggle room for what's called change orders or unanticipated costs. And it's quite common in processes and projects. So what we, as David, Mark, and myself, I actually guided David to look to the CPC for an amendment to increase the funding, to handle the contingency factor of the potential processes going through the project. My recommendation to CPC was somewhere in the range of an extra $30,000 to $50,000. Now, I met with CPC. David couldn't make the last CPC meeting, but I presented the pitch of why, where we're at, what we're going to, and where what we're looking for in regards to an amendment. At that time, CPC was informed that the bids for the current second bidding process would be opened prior to the next CPC meeting or the final CPC meeting before controls become articles or before FinCom potentially moves them forward per charter, not per the TA deadline, but per the charter deadline, with the understanding that they want a more accurate cost, meaning bids X. Now we're comfortable approving or moving forward $30,000, $35,000, $40,000. I believe the CPC put this article in front of the FinCom as kind of an earmark so that you had an understanding that something was coming. I anticipate that $5,000 being somewhere more in the range of anywhere between 30 and 50. And that's to make sure that the project as a whole is completed from A to Z, shovel in the ground to ribbon cutting, without having to go back to town meeting. And that's kind of, this is a little bit more of an earmark, but I would anticipate that request being somewhere in the $30,000 to $50,000 range.
And you think that request is going to come at annual town meeting?
No. Like, you're probably going to get CPC. They have a meeting, I want to say, in a week, and they're probably going to.
Oh, you think they're going to try to amend this? Okay.
Yeah. The second we opened bids and we reviewed for conformity. Now, we haven't officially awarded the lowest bidder. Greg is the chief procurement officer. and he was out on COVID. I think Greg's on, but he was out on COVID, so I wasn't going to inundate him with, can we issue award immediately? But I don't foresee there being an issue. But once we issue award, hopefully sometime this week, we'll know that that cost is X. But we need to build in contingencies for traditional change orders, things of that nature that will most likely be an anticipatory situation, so that we
Okay.
have the project fully completed within this fiscal year.
Okay. Ken, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
So this project originally was $101,717.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're talking about another 30,000 on top of that.
Potentially, yeah, potentially anywhere between 30 and 50. Yeah, oh, is Ken muted? I don't know if he, so Ken,
No.
we actually, the original bid that came in, the first bid was 45% over estimate. So then I had David Mark and the architect that was hired scope it down to the budget. And they scoped it down to the budget. And of course, the bids came in with less than 5% wiggle room. So in order to, we could award, but if there's unanticipated cost, then we don't have a funding mechanism to pay for it. And then never want to see a project half finished and then we run out of money. And then we're in breach of contract, things of that nature. So the 30 and 50,000 puts our contingency in play for the construction process.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And part of this gone up in cost is just the fact that this was conceived before the terrible amount of inflation.
I would
Or-
tell you part of this is the simple fact that the federal government did not phase in funding. They just dropped it from a helicopter, and contractors don't exponentially grow within 6 months. So you have money grabs here. This is a full-on money grab. I would say that's the same with well 4A treatment processes, things of that nature. Now, if this was a project, say this was a DPW project, when you heard me talk to Calvin earlier, where let's just say we didn't need water and there was a luxury to move forward with 4A and treatment, I would say, okay, let's pump the brakes and see where the economic trend goes, and let's not react in this. This could be
Right.
weighed in both options. Now, CPC can say, maybe we don't want to move this project forward, but I feel like they've fully invested in it. And the gauge that I got from CPC is they do want to move this forward. So if you want to move it forward, what we can't have is a half-finished project, because at that point, we definitely wasted taxpayers' money. So at this point, we got to kind of move that and make sure that the project goes from start to completion within the scope that CPC is looking for moving forward.
So I get that, Justin, but that's exactly the point here. You've got a project that's $100,000 and now could be $150,000.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
so,
don't disagree. I'm not trying to guide this committee as a whole. I'm just letting you know where the process is of what we're at. The request came from DPW with David Mark that we know that we don't have contingency in play for construction. That's our experience. We know what contingencies happen, especially in today's market. There will be a lot of change orders, guaranteed. There'll be material delays that will require change orders, things of that nature. So the contingency to move that project forward will need.
no,
30 to
I get that. I get that, Justin. I appreciate that. But the $100,000, my recollection was that was already that was already including contingency. Okay,
Mhm.
so it's not like it was $100,000 and we looked at it and said, oh, we need a contingency fund. This was an amount with 100,000 including contingency, and the project was sold to some degree on the price being, not being $150,000. And so I'm just shaking my head at this.
No, you're not wrong. This is almost a replication of 4A. So the contingency was built into the bid, but traditional standard contingencies. And this is the result of over that. That's all.
This is not the same as 4A. 4A is for a necessary expenditure for the town to provide drinking water. Okay, this is not a necessary expenditure.
So I wasn't comparing it to the import.
No, I know
comparing
you
it
were.
to the process of where it is.
Yeah.
And of course, I knew you weren't comparing the two that way. Okay, but somebody listening to this later on needs to understand that the 4A is a requirement and this is not.
Yeah, luxury versus need, 100%.
Kevin, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so an interesting thing. So I was at the CPC meeting the other day and I had
Mhm.
questions about the ADA compliance about the site.
Oh, okay.
So I'm hoping, Justin, you can comment on what is our liability currently and what is the liability with the project as scoped. And there was, so I believe like there's also going to be like a fence going around it. And there was also talk of a crushed stone path or a processed stone path. I think if you could like comment on like those on various degrees of the project that's being considered, like what is the current state as far as ADA compliance is? What's the bare minimum we need to do to get this ADA compliant, and what's exactly a luxury as
So
far as
absolutely.
ADA compliance is concerned?
Yep. I can speak to all that, Kevin. I'll try to do it really quick so it's not completely off topic. So currently right now, the site isn't actually a park. It's being maintained by a volunteer, which is David Mark. So we're not encouraging people to utilize that site. Volunteer kind of takes it upon himself with approval that we allow him to clean up the area and make sure that, you know, it looks nice. It's aesthetically appealing, but it is completely passive in nature, meaning not an active park. The project would turn this into an active park per se with passive use. And when I say passive recreation, it's not an athletic field dynamically taken into account. It is not a designed park per se. It is an aesthetic look of a used area for passive use, picnics, walking through, things of that nature. So just kind of keep that in mind when we're talking liability, because those factors actually matter in risk and liability and how insurance companies look at it. So the base project as a whole is to just clean up vegetation for a more aesthetic appeal on the rail trail that catches people's eyes and kind of looks at the historic aspect of the foundation, one of the original houses. David could speak to this. I think he wrote a book on it. I mean, he could speak to this in detail. But the project itself, the base bid was more of the aesthetic appeal and opening it up. There was add alternates. The original project as a whole started to transform it into a walkable, more passive / active park recreational facility. And to provide ADA accessibility, crushed stone paths were provided to allow for ADA accessibility access to the foundation. So there's an old house foundation there. That being said, the rescope, we had to eliminate that as a base bid and had as an add alternate, meaning like a extra. Currently, the base bid that we would potentially award under the allowed balance right now would not include the stone dust paths. It would not include ADA accessibility. Now, does that hold us liable? Actually, it doesn't, because the site right now isn't an active site. And under the base bid, it would just be considered a passive aesthetic recreational facility, meaning that accessibility to the foundation isn't provided for ADA or barrier or non-barrier pedestrians. So we're not actually creating a barrier because we never created a path to begin with. Now, if the CPC were to move forward a modification of $30,000 or $50,000, there is the potential to award add alternates, which would allow for ADA accessibility to the foundation. So all of this is weighing based off of the potential costs and moving that forward. But that being said, even if the base bid is awarded and this article doesn't move forward, CPC David Mark can still move forward with the base bid award of an aesthetic aspect, and then they would just have to leave unfinished projects if the contingency met our allowable balance, meaning we would have to eliminate parts of the project while the project was taking place if there was an issue. And then it would just be clearing of vegetation, some safety aspects such as fencing around the foundation, things of that nature that would potentially reduce risk, but we wouldn't be inviting people to use that site. Excuse me. And if just for some historic knowledge, if the FinCom wasn't aware, at the time that this CPC project was being vetted by the select board, the DPW actually didn't support the project from a DPW operation standpoint, meaning the DPW is never committed to maintenance and operation of this site after this project has taken place. It was still moved forward because David Mark, as the applicant, provided means to perform maintenance and operations that satisfied the powers to be, but just know that was never something that the DPW approved or supported as part of a long-term maintenance program. So we've always guided the applicant to design this based off of passive use, because we don't have the operating funds to maintain this in a traditional active park role.
Okay.
So to be clear, this project is dependent upon the maintenance of this project would be dependent upon the goodwill of volunteers.
That is correct. And that was always part of the original approval. Which I don't underestimate the volunteers of Maynard though. You will never hear me underestimate the volunteers of Maynard. I assure you that.
Are there any other questions?
No further questions from me.
Okay. Anyone else? All right.
So,
go ahead.
you're going on the speed limits?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. So there was some discussion of this, and I'm hoping I put on board docs, but I'm hoping I also sent, there was emails from Chief Noble and Justin concerning this topic. There was some discussion about how to go about speed limits, and it was determined that what seemed to be the easiest, most straightforward, least amount of signage, hopefully least amount of confusion, is to adopt a townwide 25 mile per hour in thickly settled, which is most of Maynard as I see it, unless otherwise posted. So for example, on Summer Street, there's a 30 mile per hour sign, isn't it, Justin?
Yeah,
Am I wrong?
I didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay.
So remember when it said unposted. So if you
Right.
took the Summer Street example, that is actually a legally posted Mass DOT approved speed limit.
Right.
So if you notice, it goes from 30, 35, down to 30, down to 25. This would not change those speed limits.
Right.
This adoption would only change the unmarked, unregulated streets. So take
Right.
like a side street. We'll take Glendale, Coburn. They technically don't have signs. So legally, when you have an unposted street, if you remember taking your driver's test, it's 30 mile an hour as a default. This would change the default in unmarked, unapproved roadways down to 25.
Right. So that was my point, is that
Oh, okay.
suddenly not everywhere is 25, because I think that was what some people were concerned about. If it says 30, if it says 35, I don't know if we have a place that's 40 in town at all, but that still applies when they're posted. This and subsequently, if there's one, I think there's one in my neighborhood that's 20 or 20 even, maybe, that still applies. You can't
That
now
is
go
correct.
25. So this just puts the default from the legal 30 down to 25.
Yeah, I like to say it closes gaps. So
Yeah.
Maynard is a very urban, dense town, and you always hear me say it's a little city. That's because it is. It's a very urban, dense town. That's actually why you see it. It's not common to see a town like Maynard with a lot of 20 mile an hour speed zones, but those are all grandfather adopted from years ago of development that you traditionally see in a city structure like Boston, Cambridge, things of that nature, is because at that time, roadways were individually looked at from Mass DOT, not the town. So at one point, Mass DOT as a state determined individualistic roadways, even in towns for miles per hour and safety aspects. Well, towns grew exponentially and Mass DOT did not. So then they pushed that onto DPWs, towns, select boards, mayors, with regulations long time ago. And that's why you see a lot of traditional speed limits. The Municipal Modernization Act allowed for a little closing of that gap, which allowed towns to adopt this regulation under Mass General Law to kind of change the default settings and certain criteria to close gaps in areas that may have a speed limit such as 30 miles per hour adopted that isn't adopted by Mass DOT, yet we as town local authorities have trouble adopting that, so they're kind of stuck in hiatus. This allows us to close those gaps. And we do receive, department heads alone, myself and Chief Noble, we do receive quite a bit of complaints and correspondence and asking, why can't we reduce X? We have a lot of speeding. 30 miles an hour in a thickly settled zone may not seem fast, but to some it is. And if you actually ever clock it with the radar gun, obviously you guys don't have radar guns, but you'll be surprised how fast that looks in a very dense area. So this, it may seem only 5 miles an hour as a reduction. Is this really a big deal? It actually is. To some folks, a lot of residents in town, I actually think this will be a huge indication of moving forward in our long-term complete streets overall pedestrian processes. We as a town of Maynard kind of hold our hat on being a walkable community. This actually helps public safety. It reduces overall vehicle speed.
So just to be clear, this does two things. It reduces the speed limit if otherwise not posted down to 25, but it also makes it very clear as people coming into town, you know, as we see in other towns, you know, it basically says if you don't see a speed limit sign, then you can assume it's 25 miles per hour.
Correct.
Okay,
And it
so
also,
this is pretty straightforward in my view.
yeah, Ken,
Yeah,
it
and as
also,
you said, it's been done by other towns surrounding us as well, so that's helpful.
yeah, I'll tell you this, 2 phases. So it also allows the police as the enforcement agent to actually ticket if there is speeding over 25. So it also allows the enforcement to be involved. So technically right now 30 is fast in thickly settled areas, but if someone's going the speed limit, it's not enforceable. So this also allows for enforcement of potential speeding in these thickly settled areas. And I will tell you that this is one, it may seem like Maynard's behind with the adoption of this regulation, but we're also a very urban environment compared to some of our surrounding communities where we have a lot of posted speed limit regulations already. Where this wasn't like, hey, let's jump on this. We have these rural roads that aren't posted that should be 30 miles an hour, and people are going 55, 60 down on like country roads like Summer Hill or something like that. So we are catching up, and I believe this is a good one for the town of Maynard for public safety as a whole. So.
Yep. Calvin, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
So I have a question about the signs. So I imagine this is only enforceable if we actually post on every entry in town so I noticed you said the appropriation is none, but I imagine there has to be some sort of cost associated with the posting of those signs.
So the entrance is part of the recommendation when you saw my email was for townwide was actually to reduce the cost of the signage, because if we did it on a street by street basis, that would exponentially raise the cost, and we may be looking at a budget adjustment. The amount of signs needed, we can handle under our already approved FY23 operating budget under the DPW for repair and maintenance. And if you drive to Concord or you drive to Stowe, you'll see the signage that needs to be posted. It's legally, Mass General Law requires MUTCD signs that look exactly like that. So we'll have the same exact signs posted at all our entrances, but that's less than 10 signs. That's something the funding is already within our FY23 budget.
Okay. But just to be clear, we probably will have a note that will say like, this is coming out of DPW's this will come out of
The signage. Sure, yeah.
So we could save more money by just stealing Concord signs and printing it over with Maynard.
Ken, you can't do that. Aaron knows where we are. Justine will be emailing me, you know that, right?
Okay, I believe. Okay, so let's touch quickly, Justin, and then I want to
Well,
let you.
Before, so
Oh,
are you
yeah,
gonna,
sure.
are you gonna touch on, you're gonna touch on the general fund budget?
Yeah.
But we also have number 6 about the bleachers. Is that something we're gonna talk to
Oh.
Justin about? Or is that something we're gonna talk to Greg about, or both?
Oh, thank you, Ken, for that reminder, actually. Justin, what do you think?
It's, I know Greg's on, so I don't want to steal Greg's thunder or not, but I don't mind either or, and we can tag team. But typically when we're talking about these things, we work together every day on these situations. So Greg, do you want to take this and present it, or would you?
This is how it works. I ask for the money and then I give it to Justin. So the bleachers, of course, as I'm sure everyone on social media otherwise has heard, is we're looking for some repairs. Now, that's not surprising news in the last however many decades or whatever, but we are looking for some repairs. We have engaged with one of our house doctor engineering firms to provide us quotes for a range of possibilities, and I'm taking some credit for that, but that was what I made the initial call, but then Justin, took the baton from there, working with the engineering firm, and everything's on the table. So we're trying to see if we can get the home field side up to certification, for what our building inspector needs to see for certification. We also want to see how much it would cost to get up to current ADA compliance, right? Because that's an important ratio to understand what the difference is. And then same goes with the visitor side. So I have to admit, we need to make this is obviously just the draft and the warrant, but as Justin pointed out, the visitor side is not completely, I wrote irreparable, so that was an error on my part, but there may be some repairs we could make to the visitor side. So either way, we tasked the engineering firm with coming up with the scope of work of what that would require. And the engineering firm is going to get both sort of like a study of the current conditions, as well as bid document, like if we want to go to bid to make these repairs happen. The engineering firm doesn't do that. They give us everything we need to get it up to that point. Because that was some of the feedback I got from the select board the other day, is that there's of course a general understanding about the current conditions and the grandfathering, if you will, of the current bleachers, but we don't know when we'll be able to get new bleachers. Although town meeting did a great job, and this is going to be a transition into the article we're looking at. Town meeting was able to appropriate $174,903 from free cash towards the design of new bleachers, engineering and design of new bleachers. But with the current sort of conditions and situation that we find ourselves, I'm proposing to the select board to consider, and of course finance as well, to consider the redesignation of that money. So instead of putting that $174,000 towards future bleachers, I was looking for a funding source for the current bleachers, which again, if our engineering firm can provide us something that we could work with, and we can get repairs that can maybe, I don't know, get us to a couple years, that'd be great. I'm not sure, but either way, we're not gonna be able to snap our fingers and get funding for new bleachers. If we were gonna do new bleachers, even for just the home side with the press box and everything, that could be $1 million, $1.5 million. I don't know, but that's obviously going to be a discussion, whether it be bonding or otherwise, or probably most likely a combination of funding sources. The select board was interested in the CPC partnership and potential for volunteerism when it came to donations. I think everything's on the table. So what I was looking for the select board to consider, and town meeting eventually, and hopefully the finance committee's endorsement, is to give me flexibility when it came to that $174,000. Of course, I wish I'd written it that way last year, so that I didn't sort of like just sort of tie myself down. But I would, say, yeah, you can see I kind of threw everything in the kitchen sink. Alumni field bleachers, repairs, replacement, design, and engineering. And then the sponsor comments is pretty much what I'm saying now, just in a slightly different way, which, as I just said, does need to be edited. So that's
Okay.
the long and the short of it. Justin, is there any like wave top stuff I missed?
No, that's pretty much the high level. This article really allows for that appropriation to be utilized for the immediate issue at hand. Unfortunately, as part of the certification process, it does require a structural engineering stamp and modifications to meet standard codes and the potential for trigger for ADA. Now that can be done. That is a modification of an existing asset, which is an efficient use of funds. Now the proposal that the architect, it's actually an architect firm and a structural engineering firm working together, because this is actually a vertical, which falls under building commission. So you're falling under building code. It has an occupancy load and a stamp that comes with it, as opposed to a roadway, which is considered horizontal in our line of work. So you need an architect to stamp a design plan, but you will also need a structural engineer for modifications to an existing structure, because the modifications will require excess weight. So when they look at that, they have to, one, thoroughly investigate the current situation. What it was designed for, its threshold, its load capacity versus its condition, what it can handle, and moving forward that process. And then that will move on to the design. Now, the anticipation for the 174,000 is the designs for that modification should not take all of the 174,000. So by modifying the or redesignating the funds, we are potentially positioning ourselves for the design of the modification and the potential remedy, or at least the decision to move on a phased part of the remedy and the actionable items for repair and modification. That being said, once that proposal is complete, we'll have a thorough understanding of the overall cost. But what we scoped the architectural firm with was a lot of options, so that we can really, as a community and the stakeholders, can say, okay, we want A because this is the funding mechanism. Not completely like, hey, it's only one way to solve this problem. There's actually multiple ways to solve this problem, and that's what the architect has been tasked with exploring.
Can someone also talk about the use of the temporary? Because we have, as I
Right, so
understood it.
Yeah, so the school department acquired temporary bleachers that they put on site last week. So I haven't seen them. I haven't been out there to take a look at them. So I couldn't really speak to them. They acquired them, and I presume that they meet whatever the specifications that the athletic department was looking for. And I don't know how the contract long. I don't know how long their contract is.
Okay. But it's presumed, sorry, Ken and Kevin, I see your hands up. I'll get to you in just a second. It is assumed that it would not be prudent to go ahead with temporaries for the length at which it would take for a whole replacement. Like it is, we are assuming that it would be better to spend money on those very, very old ones rather than take them down, get them out, and just use temporaries until we get new ones, because it will take likely a long time.
I think that is probably a safe assumption, but we can put a little science to that. Like when we get the quotes back from an engineering firm, they're gonna give us the quotes, or they're gonna give us the materials that we need to be able to get quotes that we could go out to bid. And if we do the math and we find out that it's worth it. However, some of it has a lot to do with the perspective of where the current bleachers are. My understanding is the temporary bleachers are probably to the side. So in other words, if it seems like it's more favorable to use the older bleachers and the cost seems to be comparable, or at least we can handle it, then maybe we'll go with that. But I understand your point. Like what's the cost benefit ratio?
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of add a little bit of that. So Alana, we actually, the DPW and the assistant facilities manager, we actually have been engaging. If you're unfamiliar with the procurement process, there is state blanket contracts where we as a town don't necessarily have to put together a bid package. The state has already done that for a number of materials, projects, services, things like that. So we've already started to make calls off the state blanket contract for the viability of lease, rental, purchase of modular systems to acquire quotes and costs to help guide that decision-making process. Unfortunately, a majority of those processes are already spoken for and already gone. And then you're also talking about a potential operating budget. So we will weigh all those, but we need to also know what the real asset, the current asset modification repairs are to weigh that cost benefit analysis.
Okay, thank you. Ken, go ahead.
So I just want to clarify. So the engineering firm that you're engaging with is going to take, they're taking a look at a full range of options and then coming back to the town and saying, here's what those options are. And when I say full range of options, there would be presumably a repair. If you're looking at the current ones, what would it cost to repair, to make safer, to perhaps also allow some some ADA compliance. These are all issues that I think have been brought forward with the current bleachers. So that, because I think there's a presumption that, that there is an immediate safety concern that there ought to be some repairs to fix problems, to make them safer and so forth. So that would be taking a look at repairing the current ones. A second option, not instead of, but might be in addition to, would be lease or purchase of, what would be presumed to be temporary bleachers. And so you could imagine purchasing a set of bleachers that might be used elsewhere. We have other fields that have bleachers that are in a poor state of repair. And so it might not be a bad idea to purchase bleachers for use at Alumni Field, knowing that when we're done with them, we could repurpose them for other areas. So I guess what I'm asking is, specifically, is the engineering firm looking at a fuller range of options, which would be, what's a new set, what's it gonna cost to fix our problem? What would it cost to repair the current, and address some of the safety issues in the current ones, and maybe supplementing that with temporary ones? Because I could imagine that, for example, you might sit there and say, look, the top bleachers really should not be, there shouldn't be families with kids up there. You ought to have the kids at the lower area where they're not endangering themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm asking is will the engineering firm be looking at that fuller range of options, or are they going to be looking at a specific thing?
So Ken, you hit both points perfectly. The difference is it's not a one-stop shop, meaning the architect and the engineer are looking at that. The DPW is exploring both those options. The architect is engaged with what their processes and their allowance are, which is the modifications to meet code, ADA compliant current assets. We have unilaterally been working with the state contracts for rent, lease, purchase of modular units that may be utilized on site in a temporary fashion or permanent, and we'll provide all of those cost analysis. Sometimes these companies don't sell them. Sometimes we don't have that option, but then we have to weigh load capacity, occupancy, what the AD and the school department is looking for. But yes, both of those are being explored, but actually under the DPW umbrella.
So I understand. So what I've heard most people talking about is, well, we wouldn't want to purchase temporary, bleachers for Alumni Field because we wouldn't want to keep those. And what I'm suggesting is it may be cheaper for the town to purchase those, with the idea that there are other fields behind the high school where you have field hockey, you have cross country and so forth. So if you're only looking at Alumni Field, you may be losing out on an option to do something else. And so then the other question I have is, and this gets back to my question about the $150,000, are we fully engaged with CPC? Because, a few years ago, pre-COVID, when the CPC put forward $10,000, a lot of commentary. I've heard a lot of commentary, you know, towards the CPC about putting that small amount in. I was there at that meeting, and what I can say is that the CPC said, we don't understand what all is needed. Let's at least put a token amount in so that the town knows that we know that this is an important initiative to fund. And so they were not being cheap. They were in fact, you know, trying to show some support for this. And so what I'm asking, I guess, is, are we fully engaged with the CPC to see what funds that we could get that might support this process?
So the CPC released its guidance for FY20, well, whatever, it updated its guidance. And in it, it does note that the notice of intent is due the first week in October. I can't remember the exact date. I forwarded that to the superintendent's office because we have to be in partnership about this. And particularly, I look towards the athletic department to drive what they need out of the bleachers, and particularly for spectating and whatnot. Because, you know, the relationship is that the town, mainly through the Department of Public Works, provides a maintenance to those facilities. But it's really like it's in support of the athletic programs. So I needed some direction from the athletic programs as to what they may need. even when that engineering firm asked, like, what capacity are we looking for the current bleachers, I relied on them. So the athletic department. So I notified the superintendent's office that a notice of intent is due the first week in October, and I'm looking for support from the athletic department to complete that. Ideally, frankly, I think it could come from the school department to fill that out for the replacement of the asset that serves them.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I get it, but this is pretty complex stuff. And I'm not sure that the school department necessarily is going to be able to wade through all the engineering questions about, not just engineering questions, but all the cost estimation of the various, you know, the various options here.
Oh, sure.
So,
well, I will provide everything. I just meant that, like, when it comes to, I had a hard time kind of figuring out who was going to be the point person. Like, I'm reluctant to put the town administrator's office for a CPC application, for example. I think it should be more organic, right? So typically there's a committee that, in my preference, whether it be the Recreation Commission or the school committee or even the select board, or Conservation Commission or what have you. But I prefer, if possible, for a committee sort of to own it, or maybe a particular department in this case. But the Rec Commission the Recreation Commission didn't seem to be so involved, and so I felt like the athletic department for the school department was a better fit.
yeah, I mean, again, not to push this point, at the risk of repeating myself, but these are difficult issues. I think you're asking a lot of volunteer boards. I think you're asking a lot of schools that are really looking at, focused on providing an education,
Sure.
to be able to wade through this. And so to me, I'm hoping that we're engaging with an engineering firm who has some expertise in this, or is able to bring in expertise to be able to sit there and advise the town and say, if you've got the right engineer, I've got to think that somebody could come forward and say, look, I know you're working towards this solution. In order to work towards this solution, there are three phases, repair and, do X, maybe buy some maybe you close the top rows and,
Sure.
Do that, but sit there and come up with the expertise. That's not a committee. I don't think that's the school committee. I don't think that's the rec committee. Certainly not the FinCom. I don't know that there's any committee who's going to know that. I'm not, Justin, as smart as he is, I'm not sure that he has the expertise about, athletic bleachers to be able to sit there and do that. I'm expecting an engineering company to come in.
So the engineering
and
firm that we
lay out-
engage is doing two things. One, they're tackling our current issue with the current, but then secondly, I've already tasked them with providing a quote for them doing a scope of services for future bleachers.
Excellent.
So that, so maybe it's like maybe 2 different applications, if you will. I'm not sure what the CPC might be palatable for. I know they don't do maintenance. So if they were, in all likelihood, they may consider anything to the current bleachers to be maintenance, right? So whether it be repairs or otherwise. But when I have that work from the engineering firm, who will now be very intimate according what our current conditions are, they will provide me a quote for giving me the work. Because again, it kind of, I have different options of engineering firms we could use, right? So this particular engineering firm will give me a quote for doing the work similar to what you're referring to, of
Okay.
like designing, engineering, getting everything ready to bid, and then I'm going to see how much their firm costs, and by that point I'll have a pretty good sense of how well they know bleachers because of what they're going to give me for the current bleachers, and
Thank
then
you.
that will inform the application. But until then, someone should still submit a notice of intent, and I still believe, like, just an overall, I bet the CPC would just like to know, like, an overall, are we looking for a replacement of bleachers? If so, what's the big picture here we're looking for? Every bell and whistle, or just the baseline? I think CPC probably needs to know something.
Well, especially because they may be able to also appropriate some in FY24 and some in FY25, depending on how we do it and the phasing and all of that stuff. So
Yeah, true.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. So every engineering firm always puts in like a fixed cost associated with like the overhead of setting up the project, getting the people together. What I'm wondering is if we could save on that fixed cost instead of like contracting an engineering firm twice, once for the sort of like the temporary solution to bridge us to the new bleachers, and the second time being for like the new bleachers. Couldn't we just contract with an engineering firm once to like consider all the options, including replacement, but to also look at like, okay, what bridge solutions are there available as well? And if so, how much additional money would you need to encompass that increase of scope to include the original purpose of these funds?
I mean, well, so I already have 2 contracts. I have multiple engineering house doctor contracts, and we have to task them individually. It's not, we didn't go out to bid. So when you have an engineering firm, you do it based on qualifications. You don't do it based on bid price, because the procurement law has the expectation that engineering firms have different expertises. Yep. And Liro seemed, the name of the particular firm that we're going with, it's called Liro, Liro, and they seemed to be responsive and enthusiastic, if you will, for the bleachers issue. So that sounds like a good deal. What they're going to provide, they will have a cost, yes, like they're like any engineering firm or a vendor, they're going to have a cost. But the state procurement law would prefer that you go based on the qualifications and expertise of the design firm, and in this case an engineering firm, instead of what their bottom line costs are.
All right, so what I'm more asking towards is like, I think there might be some savings here if we did everything under one project instead of splitting out into 2. Like one project, just do it one project with the bridge solution and the replacements all rolled under one project.
Well, they're going to give us quotes for the different. If we think of maybe as phases, like we need to have the current bleachers addressed, and maybe consider that phase 1, and then maybe phase 2 would be the future. And so they're going to give us a different scope of work for that different work. It is different work. I mean, you have current bleachers and then you have future bleachers, in which in all likelihood, the future bleachers will require the demolition of the current bleachers. So that it's hard for me to kind of consider it one scope.
I would also add, part of that too, Kevin, is there's going to be some community input. So if we just ask the architect, we're not necessarily having community input for the future of what those bleachers look like. There may be a lot of input from the schools. There may be some input from FinCom, things of that nature. More of very similar to what you're seeing with the school process, where there may be more wants than necessarily the meat and potatoes of what is needed. when you're talking about asking residents to bond and borrow of a project of this complexity. Now, I do not underrate how expensive bleacher replacements are to accommodate the load or the occupancy load for this. You're talking about millions of dollars, and bridging that gap, Ken, with CPC is going to be very difficult. Can they fund portions of it? Absolutely. Can they fund the majority of it under the recreational bucket, which actually is the overage bucket? Is going to be very difficult without bonding. So these things will all be weighed. Part of that process will really come from the full proposal and execution of the design for current modifications of the existing asset. Once we know what the existing asset is capable of doing, its length, its processes, and what the costs are to remediate that, then we can look at temporary bleachers, procurement, rent, lease activities, while simultaneously looking at community task force or a community group that involves all parties to kind of define what the scope is for the future idea of what the bleachers are for the town of Maynard. If we don't work together within the community, it's going to be a hard sell to say, hey, we need $5 million for these bleachers, and they're doing this X, Y, Z, and maybe ADA didn't have a say in this. The school committee, maybe their liaisons didn't have a say in this. And we got to make sure that we hit at least have a high level of understanding of what all the stakeholders that will have a part of this may be looking for in the future of those bleachers.
So Alana, I'll point out that Natasha has her hand up, and I was also going to make the remark that I think we should wait to see what the schools are doing, because it sounds like they may already be spending, they may have already procured at least a solution. So I would just point out that to the chair that Natasha does have her hand up as a representative of the school.
Are you, are you all set, Kevin?
I am all set.
Okay. Natasha, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to add the mention about renting. So the superintendent shared last week that they had rented 6 15-foot section bleachers holding 40 people per section. Right now, the agreement is through October 17th, and the most recent warrant that came through had that cost for that period at about $7,800.
Okay.
So just to put some numbers to, that's that time frame and the rental of what is there.
So I'm sorry, Natasha, you said 7,800?
Yes.
Through October, what was it, 17th?
Like the middle, yes, the middle, and he would reevaluate if, but obviously, that adds up pretty quickly when you're talking about, through the season and so forth.
Yep.
So.
Well, 174 divided by 78 divided by 78.
We wouldn't need them through the winter.
Right.
I imagine you're going to keep them through football, and what else is soccer in the fall, or is that just spring?
No, they have that in the spring, and then you have like the graduation and events.
Right. So presumably it would be through like football season and then take away. And then if we hadn't yet figured out, then they could come back in the spring.
I think we'll talk about it within the budget subcommittee, which will be meeting actually later on this week to kind of get a sense of, because he did note in his report as of last Thursday that extended as needed. So I'm guessing there were some, question marks on what those events might be that might require extending, and how do we factor in that unexpected cost along that way. So we'll make sure we share more to come as we get it.
So I will just point out that at 7,800 at roughly a month, that comes out to about 22. This appropriation for Article 6 would amount to 22 months of those rentals.
Can I just add something though?
Yep.
So it's not apples to apples though. The current leased rental equipment is less than a quarter of the capacity of the current bleacher assets. So if you were going to try to do apples to apples in regards to occupancy load and seating capacity, you have to kind of take that down a notch and then divide it, and then there is also some indications that we've received at the select board from some of the volunteer groups that the current leased rental don't necessarily meet what they need for their specific sports, i.e. football needs the press box. They need height
Right.
for the cameras and things of that nature. So it's not like, hey, this is the exact replica at 7,800. That's the easy, but there's many variables that still have to come into
Right.
play. And one of them is occupancy load. So the current rental leases wouldn't be able to hold the capacity that the home bleachers do for, say, the traditional graduation process. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Right. Okay, any other questions on Article 6?
Alana, I had one more question actually
Yep.
about this before, since we're talking about the bleacher. Would this be anticipated to be used for rental expenses to allocate towards this fund?
That wasn't how I wrote it. I wasn't expecting to that effect. It was mostly the focus of the repairs in the future, not sort of, no, that's not how it's written.
Okay.
But so I will add one thing though, Greg. So kind of go back to what Ken said. Should we potentially purchase a modular set of bleachers? Replacement
Oh,
could
that's
fall under.
replacement, sure.
Right.
So at that point, I will tell you, based off of long-term lease, if we anticipate that we're going to borrow $3 million next year to replace bleachers, then I would encourage you not to buy anything at this point. But do we actually believe wholeheartedly that we're going to be able to piggyback that on a lot of the other projects within the next year or two? So Ken's premise and conceptual theory on procuring a modular set for the next couple of years and then using it somewhere else is actually a very logical choice, depending on the cost versus the lease and rental agreement. We do need to kind of weigh that out and make sure that we look at that wholeheartedly. What is the occupancy load? Will it actually satisfy the stakeholders in the current environment for the next 2 years? Unfortunately, sometimes people truly, the residents that are truly upset about this are the residents who have children that this is their senior year. They are coming off a COVID year where they, as a whole, kind of already had a bad junior year in regards to sports, not just educational aspect, but the social emotional aspect of sports, where this parent group is now like, hey, this is the second year in a row my kids aren't getting a traditional school, and this is their varsity year. And for some who play sports, that's a big year. That may be their final year of ever playing competitive sports again. And that's what they're looking at. And I just want to make sure that we all weigh that in regards to, it's not just about budget. It is about one-time last opportunities for some residents and future residents of the town of Maynard. And we are exploring that. I assure you, when we're talking about what DPW is looking at from rental, lease, purchase, we're not looking at something that won't accommodate that for the foreseeable next couple of years as well. We're looking at large modular systems. So we'll definitely weigh both of those options.
That's a really good point, Justin, and I really appreciate your sensitivity toward the people of Maynard and the fact that, yeah, there's multiple uses for this. It's not, some people might be like, whatever, you stand up watching a football game, and that this is not just about that, not that that's not important, and that there are a lot of things to think about when sometimes we think, well, just do this. Well, just, to sort of the Band-Aids and the things.
It's the intangible,
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just really appreciate you pointing that out. Kevin, go ahead. You're on mute.
So I was just going to ask, are these entire bleachers eligible for CPC funding? Because I look at the Community Preservation Act, and it does say public recreation, irregardless of the size of the spend, but just in general, hypothetically, could 100% of CPA funds be spent on the bleachers?
Not on the current bleachers.
You can't do repairs and maintenance. You can do a full rehabilitate, like a full new bleacher structure. Yes, as I understand it, it would be eligible.
And is the CPA, is the CPC allowed to take out bonds and pay those bonds under?
Yeah, we have it on the golf club right now, the golf
Yep.
course, as a matter of fact.
Well,
That
that's,
is-
yeah,
Yeah, that's currently under the rec, but that's also what's contending against us too. Remember, the recreation isn't an individual bucket, it's the leftover aspect. So it's the undesignated fund. So that's what makes it complex, because in Maynard, the CPC and the town and the applicants have used a lot of that undesignated fund for a lot of recreational purposes, which sometimes constrains why we haven't got to that $1 million, $2 million for bleacher replacement. But I believe, you know, there is a process where we can look at this as a whole and kind of see and weigh our options of the potential bonding, borrowing, but that all comes on the back of due diligence and proper planning, making sure we know known costs. We make sure that all the community stakeholders have been heard and we have a high level of what the understanding of those replacement bleachers are, so that we don't get to a town meeting and say we're borrowing $4 million and all of a sudden we have a rogue group come out of nowhere saying we weren't asked and we weren't involved and we don't want that design and we killed everything. We want to make sure that that process is, you know, vetted properly, but that takes time. And I believe our best course of action at this time is actually the two-phase approach that we started this conversation with: modifications for current assets and exploration of lease, rental, and procurement of modular units in the immediate, working towards long-term resolution. We were working towards long-term resolution. The appropriation of this fund was the town as a whole working towards that.
Yeah.
This has just come in an expedited manner, so.
and I guess I have another question about the CPA fund. So is the state reimbursement for CPA funding, is that just
Mhm.
based upon how much, you know, I know there's like a calculate formula, but that formula is like based upon how much we're allocating, like relative to other towns, or?
It's just a percentage reimbursement,
Okay,
and
But-
it's handed to us by the state every year, and it changes.
it does change, but the state doesn't say like, oh, you spent this much on open space, this, other than like following the guidelines, or other than following the rules about what percentages have to be allocated, like that reimbursement does not depend on
No,
what we
I don't-
actually
I
spend.
don't
No,
the
the
think
money on.
state,
we
the
can,
state doesn't audit us. So that,
Yeah.
so we have to submit our end of year reports, which does include that. And our own auditing firm will double check that we're doing everything on the up and up. But no, there's no like,
there's no way we can
there's
make that
no-
reimbursement higher by being like, but we spent it on this, would you like better?
yeah,
It's not like that.
Okay,
it's all formulaic.
Yep,
and
formula.
and are we, to what degree are we funding the to what degree are we doing the surcharge to the point of the maximum allowed?
It is one level.
It's one, it's
For
just
C-
one
for
level.
C- Yeah, for CPA, it is one amount. It's 1.5%. Is that right?
So when the towns adopted it, yeah, I think it's at 1.5. I think towns could have had the option of changing the percentage of the surcharge. I don't know off the top of it, because I'm not looking at the law, but I think you're right. I think it is at 1.5% in Maynard, and I don't know if that's the max. I think that's a good question for the CPC.
Yep, that I'm gonna be
He
talking
is
to
our
some-
liaison,
yeah,
so I'm sure he will ask them.
I bring this up because I think there's a opportunity if we were to, as far as the new bleachers are concerned, I think there's an opportunity to lessen the tax impact on the residents of Maynard by optimizing for as much CPA funding for these bleacher projects
Yeah.
as much as possible.
Sure.
And
Yep.
I think we should probably consider a long-term plan to get that money in place and get that money and to be able to optimize it. So as much money comes from CPA funding as possible when we do
That-
the placement.
Yeah.
And maybe these bridges and these, either the leasing of these either the leasing of the modular units or these temporary repairs are the bridge we need to get us there. But
Yeah.
I want to be able to say that we're doing this bridge because we're trying to configure the finances to minimize the tax impact of these new bleachers.
All right, is there any, I'm sure this discussion of bleachers and whatnot is going to continue. far beyond special town meeting. But is there any other questions on Article 6? Okay. So let's talk about the general fund budget. And Justin, just while we have you here, if you could touch on that 150 on your line, which I believe is due to the increase of the trash contract.
That is correct, Alana. So the 150,000 is 100% tied to the contractual obligation of the recently executed service contract with E.L. Harvey and our solid waste and recycling curbside program. So we're coming off of a 5-year contract that we previously had with E.L. Harvey and Sons for curbside collection and streamlined recycling processes. If you've ever heard me present to the board or have seen some of the solid waste PowerPoint presentations, you know it's a complex system, like many other systems. These are high-level services that towns provide. So in our current situation, we have multiple contracts that resolve our whole solid waste program. So we have a blanket contract with multiple towns for the disposal of solid waste, meaning the location that solid waste goes to gets burnt by an incinerator company called Wheelabrator. They've changed their name again, but I think that's due to EPA issues. But we have a large scale contract with a majority of communities within the state that we pay Wheelabrator directly for the amount of solid waste that gets delivered there. The contract that just was recently put in place with E.L. Harvey is the truck, the person that drives the truck that loads the trash and delivers it to Wheelabrator, but it is also the recyclable streamline. So the cart that you put in place and all the recyclables you throw in there, that doesn't actually go to Wheelabrator. Recyclable commodities go to E.L. Harvey's facility. They also have a facility. So their facility is a recyclable commodity facility. They then take those streamlined. So we have the luxury of everybody can just throw everything that's recyclable in one easy container, gets it out to the street, which enhances recycling. While those go and get dropped off at a facility at E.L. Harvey, and they actually have to separate those commodities because when they actually go to sell them or dispose of them, they actually have to be separated commodities. So you have to pay for them. We're coming off of a 5-year contract where Maynard at the back end of the contract seen a large luxury where we were actually paying well below industry standards for our streamlined recycling and our service pickup contracts. Well, unfortunately, like everything, then when we kind of land in situations where contracts end, and if the economy isn't great, you have services and processes that try to capture the losses of a previous contract, meet today's industry standards, and predict tomorrow's future. So service contracts, that's why in the state of Massachusetts, it's highly frowned upon to have contracts specific over 3 years and 5 years. Massachusetts made a lot of mistakes in the 80s with having 20-year solid waste contracts that burnt communities wholeheartedly when executed because there's a fluctuating market. And it is frowned upon to have large contracts or long length contracts in regards to solid waste. What we proposed to the select board was one, to bridge our current contract, our Sunrise contract of 5 years into the future. Now, knowing that we're landing in a volatile economic market and one that's actually driven not only by the federal government, but the global market, and also fed by labor costs and the potential of large dumps of federal funding, we're contending with a lot of variables here in how you execute that contract. So what locales can do is recommend contracts of lower length terms. And that's what we made a recommendation. One, so that we can explore and see how the economic climate kind of transforms and changes. Two, so that we can look to adapt our current services to more innovative, efficient, effective approaches. So we did initially make a recommendation to change our operation services prior to this contract, and that was adopted by the Board of Health, but it was not subsequently adopted by the Select Board. Thus, allowing us to force into a contract that actually has the same method at the current situation. Now, describing this as a project versus services, unfortunately, we also don't have the luxury to stop services. So we have to negotiate a contract. And then to piggyback that, we are also contending with the service within the state of Massachusetts that has an oligopoly. There is not a lot of competition in regards to solid waste. All of those factors exponentially drove up the contract that is currently signed. With that being said, the 150 is an adaptation of our previous contract costs. So when we looked for an FY23 budget, we knew we were in contract negotiations. So we didn't appropriate funds beyond a contract that we didn't know the cost of. We just used the same cost margin of our previous contract, knowing that there will be a modification and adjustment as we work through the negotiation. The negotiation turned into a lengthier negotiation than I would like to, that I'd be happy with, but we have came to terms, and I will encourage the FinCom that I am a bull and I do not back down easily. I know 150,000 seems like a lot, but the contract was potentially double that if we didn't push back exponentially and get to a situation of where we are right now. I told this to the board as well. If I wasn't comfortable pushing this forward, I wouldn't have presented to the board to execute that contract. At this point, I am comfortable given the market, where we are, what our current conditions are, what our current services are, and comparable communities to what our services are within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, working with DEP, that this contract is appropriate at this time. The 150 accounts for a unit cost mechanism that we didn't have in our previous contract. So take the truck person loading it. That's a fixed cost, and we know what that is. So if you actually look at the contract, you'll see year 1 fixed cost, year 2 fixed cost, year 3 fixed cost. But under that, you'll see a $90 a ton unit cost, and that's actually for the commodity of recyclables. So when streamlined recycling first became a big hit in the industry, recyclables were actually a revenue producing commodity, meaning the United States sold gas and China bought it at X amount because they were using it for some material process they were developing or whatever, XYZ. Well, unfortunately, that market became saturated because a lot of the United States started implementing streamlined or recycling processes. So we're ahead of the game. The problem is the global market can't utilize that saturation of material anymore and is now looking to get rid of it. Meaning, if I'm using glass to produce widget A and there's no more widget producers of glass, we now have to get rid of it and there's nobody buying it. So that is a fluctuating commodity market. We deal with this with fossil fuels, electricity, things of that nature. So you see a commodity market. So right now we're at a situation where the recyclable commodities globally are all over the place. So 1 month cardboard may actually be paying out dividends, while another month cardboard we may have to pay to get rid of, and vice versa. So take all the streamlined products in each one and they're looked upon that. So the 150 that we're pushing forward here is to account for the average commodity over the past 2 years of streamlined recycling and what those unit costs would be. They come out to roughly about $60 a unit based off of averages of other comparable communities. We don't have a baseline in Maynard because we never paid for commodities recyclable based off the fact that we had a 5-year contract that had that built into it. So all we have is the tonnage of those commodities, but we don't have the tonnage broken down because it was never acquired or never provided as part of the previous contract. So we had to take comparable communities, comparable to Maynard and what the streamlined recycling process looks like, that already had contracts. So their piggyback contracts were, 2 years prior to us, that had this information. And over the course of 2 years, the average unit cost for recyclables was about $60 a unit cost. The 150 is based off that average. Now, if you watch the select board, I have indicated that that could get as high as $250,000, because let's just say the commodity market completely tanks and recyclables are no longer a commodity, meaning we have to pay to get rid of them. We could hit the threshold of 9. Now that's a cap price in the contract, but that could change that 150 to 250. But based off of the evaluation, both myself and DEP has done with comparable communities under that program, we're pretty confident that $60 a ton is what we're looking at for the foreseeable future under this contract. And thus that would be the 150. And at this point, the recommendation to the board, we have not made a recommendation to change the pay-as-you-throw program. So this would be 100% subsidized through the general taxation, which is what the 150 is. I know that was a lot of information.
And this contract, Justin, this new contract is for how long?
So the current contract is 1 year with 2 one-year extensions.
Okay,
And the reason we built that in is, one, we then have the ability to get out of it. So if the
Right.
economy completely changes and we want to say, oh, we're done this contract, we're going to go out and try to get a new contract long-term, the commodity market and try to capture that, we have that ability. And then 2, the recommendation based off the board, when we were talking about change and innovation and how our services actually handle, moving away from maybe a pay-as-you-throw to an automated system, efficiencies, and moving towards what
right.
I would say roughly 70 to 80% of the communities in Massachusetts have already moved towards, to kind of limit the costs on labor and insurance for workman's comp, things of that nature. We are looking to form a task force. So that task force will potentially need their due diligence and their time, but they're not forced. So let's just say the task force is working through this. Instead of saying, hey, you have 3 months to solve this problem, how about we holistically solve the problem and know that we have extensions?
Right,
So we
if
can
we need them.
work for a long-term sustainable plan with long-term operational reductions and looking at a program that will work to suit all the residents' needs, while also potentially providing to reduce and hedge against commodities market fluctuation in the future.
Yep. Okay, so I just want to reiterate a couple of quick points. One is that this is an estimate. It is possible that this 150 may not cover all of it. In that, should that be the case, Greg or Justin, are we looking at pulling from reserve funds, stabilization? Can it wait till ATM and get appropriated more in the operating? What will happen if this 150 turns into 250?
Good. Yeah, Justin's not talking now.
I can talk, everyone.
No. The great question. I don't have an answer for you right now. I think
fine.
all options would be on the table.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say let's explore all options, because we'll also be able to gauge it, Alana. So monthly reporting is part of the requirement. Monthly reporting of commodities markets.
So we won't get surprised.
No.
Like
I'll start
months
to
away.
have
Yeah.
red. I'll start to have red flag indications.
Okay.
As we're building this baseline. I know Jeff kind of beat me up the other day when I was on the select board, and I said the beauty of this is we get to actually now gauge our baseline. Obviously, that's not the beauty because we have to pay for it. But there's sometimes, and the reason I said that is Jeff is really analytical, such as myself. Without a baseline, it's very hard to have that pinch point in negotiations.
Right.
So we were working off analytical data that we had to acquire from DEP and other communities. But when we have our own baseline, it gives the negotiator a lot more leeway and power here. And then it allows us to really understand what we're looking for in a long-term contract. That's why this contract and the recommendation was for 1 year with 2 one-year extensions. Is we don't want to trap ourselves into a long-term operational expense, especially if the commodity market changes. We want to be on the high, not at the low. Right now, we're stuck in the low, but we're stuck in the low in the short term.
Okay. Kevin, go ahead.
Yes. So my first question is let's say town meeting amends this budget and zeroes out that 150 public works amount. So no increase to public works. What would be the consequences of that amendment?
So I would say that we'd be forced to explore alternative financial options, just like Alana said, where that may actually have implications on the reserve fund. So we'd still have to pay for a contract that we execute. So at that point, let's just say that somebody amended it and town meeting said, nope, we're zeroing that out. At the end of the year, if it's 150, 200, 250, we're then going to have to capture that whole 150, 200, 250 at either annual town meeting appropriation changeover, free cash, or stabilization. So you're just moving the financial can one way or another.
So essentially, this decision has already been made. I think we'll have to talk about the process of how we got here after special town meeting, but I do think we have to have that discussion of how we arrived here, because I do have some concerns about how we arrived here. But essentially, the ship has essentially sailed. That the contract is signed, the town is on the hook for that money. And so one way or another, we're going to have to pay it either by appropriation of the general budget or by the reserve fund transfer. Is that an accurate characterization?
Contract is executed and the funding mechanism may be there. Now, remember, this is 150 based off of a unit cost.
Yep.
Let's just say the commodity market completely changes, Gavin, and all of a sudden all recyclables are revenue producers. That 150 could be 50. Could be 0. So unfortunately, that's the hedge behind this, is that we now have a unit cost without a baseline for Maynard, that we had to use a lot of comps and DEP comps to kind of come up with a nice conservative approach to buffer ourselves from the potential of a reserve fund transfer of $250,000 at the end of the year.
So again, I mean, I have, so my next question is was there any other provider considered other than E.L. Harvey?
So at this point, so just for procurement purposes in Massachusetts, solid waste does not need to go out to procurement. The reason it's like that is because of lobbyists and oligopolies.
Yep.
So DEP actually has noticed that when you go out for RFPs, and this was a guidance that I received prior to our contract sunsetting, was that what they were seeing in the industry is actually those oligopolies trying to overstep themselves and actually pricing themselves out of being able to provide services. So DEP made a strong recommendation to all communities in the last 2 fiscal years to renegotiate their current contracts with their service provider, because there's a huge cost changeover to changing service providers, meaning they acquire a huge cost changeover for rerouting and distribution and service interruption up front. So moving forward with an already known service contractor, you eliminate or reduce the cost of changing over the entirety of the operation. So part of the way that we hedged against that was based off the length of the contract, the year with 2 one-year extensions, so that we can, as a community, once we received guidance from the select board that they did not want to change the operation and the logistics, moving from a pay-as-you-throw sticker program to carts, no trash service, etc. I provided 4 options. We are forced into moving forward with our service contract, and we took the best case scenario that we were allowed to move forward with at that time.
Okay, so I'm understanding that you presented options before the select board, included which was continue with E.L. Harvey, in addition to changing it to, like I imagine, bins, in addition to going to private service.
Mm-hmm.
And the select board ruled all the other options out.
Can I clarify that the select board didn't tell us to stop services. So
Right.
the Board of Health is the enforcer of the sanitation code,
Okay.
and they say that trash needs to be picked up.
Yep.
So the select board, as the executors of the policies of the town, they say figure it out. So we procure services to do that. If the select board has told us that they do not wish to provide services through those means, meaning E.L. Harvey that collects trash, then we wouldn't. But if the select board doesn't tell us to do that, then we will do our jobs of procuring those services. I think what you're looking for is a much bigger conversation than the purposes of this town meeting. And my recommendation is to wait until an advisory group is formed, which the select board have already endorsed my recommendation to do so, to provide me and then the select board as to future options.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep.
So here's where I'm coming from. In every industry I've worked in the past 17 years, non-competitive contracts are a big red flag that only get approved under extensive scrutiny. There's a good
Kevin,
reason for that.
Hold
Okay.
on. I'm gonna interrupt you right there. As I
All right.
said, this is a huge conversation that needs to be discussed. But right now at 9:17, and the fact that what we're looking at is whether or not we're going to go ahead and approve a general fund budget that has $150,000 increase for a contract that has been approved and signed. I think the discussion should be, the larger discussion needs to get
Postponed.
But
Okay, I agree.
postponed for another meeting,
I agree. provided
including
that
with the task force.
Yeah. I agree under the understanding that this contract has already been signed and executed.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
All right.
If that were still up for debate, then there may be more discussion to be had.
I do think there is going to be some bearing on our commentary, though.
Sure. Natasha, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a non-trash question. PEG access.
Okay,
Greg,
hold on, Natasha, hold on. I
Yeah,
haven't
it's on the
moved off
general.
of this yet.
no, it's on the it's about the budget.
Yeah,
The article
That's
you're
fine.
on,
Yeah, no, I get that, but give me a
Oh,
second
okay.
because I haven't moved off of
the trash.
the trash yet. Just let me close that out.
Okay.
So is there any other questions for Justin on the trash or anything else before we close out the discussion, which was well over time with Justin?
I have some questions on another topic. The golf course.
The golf, okay, is it
No.
pertaining to special
I'd
town
like
meeting
to,
or?
I'd like us to have a
Okay.
discussion at some point.
Okay,
Also, in all
let me ma-
seriousness, that's not
Yep.
for this evening, but.
I'll make a
you
note of
know,
it though.
Yeah,
Golf course with Justin specifically, Ken, you're looking for,
well, so, I think Justin, is part of it.
okay,
Greg may, feel that he's part of it as well. I don't know who all is, part of it, but
Okay.
there's a significant, there's a significant set of questions about, the disposition of that property that
Okay.
is going to come before the town. And that's going to happen sooner rather than later.
all right, I'm gonna make a note of that. All right, anything else for Justin tonight on what has been discussed for the special town meeting articles? Okay, then I am going to say thank you so much, Justin, for coming, for overstaying in the best way possible. I'm sorry we kept you so late.
Always a
Thank you,
pleasure.
Justin.
I'm glad we can answer those questions. Thank you.
All
Thank
right,
you.
appreciate it. All right, now I'm gonna open up to more discussion about Article 5 in its entirety, the general fund budget changes. And before we get into any specific, Greg, do you want to
Yeah, I'll
go
give an
over
overview.
a little bit the general government edition and the public safety edition?
Yeah, sure. So I wrote the comments, which is,
Yep.
I'm about to paraphrase. The public safety one is a little faster. It's $25,000. One of our fire trucks needs to get fixed. It costs $25,000. The other one is, the other article is for the general government. That includes, I want to say 45,000. Thank you. $46,000 towards, and don't ask me what this is, a bi-directional amplifier equipment. Now, well, actually, what Chief has explained this to me is that their communication equipment needs to be relayed, and it needs a relay within those school, like the facility itself, it needs to have its amplifier. So that's, I don't know any more technical stuff beyond that, but we need to have that installed. I believe that there is one already installed in the Green Meadow Elementary School, and so we just need to have a similar system set up for the relaying of public safety communication, and it costs $46,000, and it's public safety. And then the great majority of the remaining general fund goes towards union personnel, department head. I have a number of unions that are fortunately already negotiated. I have one outstanding, which is the firefighters, but we did the public works, we did the professionals, firefighters is ongoing. We did Chief Stowers, Megan Zamudo's. I'm doing Justin's. I've proposed the creation of finance director to the select board, so I need money for that position. And then there's probably someone else I'm forgetting. And then there's Oh, but then Becky retired and she gets a payout. I also, our chief assessor just submitted her retirement notification today, so she's going to get a payout. And then there might be another retirement on the horizon, but I don't know when that person may retire. But I'm trying to set money aside in our personnel contracting for that purpose. And then there's a relatively smaller amount, $7,245 towards our sustainability and energy contracts. So right now we've been using Beth Greenblatt. She works with Beacon. I can't remember her firm, but she's been consulting for us towards solar panels at the high school in particular. So I'd like to continue to employ her as the school department has been taking on that project now. And they could use that advice as well as other advice that we may seek for the town, especially with the creation of sustainability committee. It's probably helpful to have money set aside for its consulting of that degree. So as I said, the majority of that money, 103,000 goes towards those labor obligations, which most are settled, but not all. And I was also very fortunate to have $100,000 of released overlay from the Board of Assessors. That's kind of a little complicated to explain because it doesn't happen all that often, or at least we just don't talk about it that often. So the town sets aside money in our general fund for abatements. And if the Board of Assessors feels like it's not going to need that much money or whatever the amount of set aside is for those abatements, then they'll release that overlay. And so that's what the Board of Assessors has agreed to do, $100,000, which is great. So my plan is to use that to knock out some of those one-time payments, primarily those retirement payouts, which, as the Finance Committee is familiar with, usually I come to the Finance Committee and ask for a reserve fund because I don't know when those are going to be. I just happen to have the timing in my favor that now I know those retirements are coming, and there happens to be a special town meeting on the horizon, and I happen to have money. So otherwise, I'd probably be coming to the Finance Committee for a reserve fund.
And why is the 46,000, if it's for public safety, why isn't that in public safety?
Because
And
we had
why
a capital line. So
okay, so it's
no, it's a good question. So we've been trying to consolidate our capital items because we have a capital planning committee now. So not this last fiscal year. Well, right. So if we did like $200-something thousand into capital items, out of our operating fund, which was a good shift. We did not do that for the June 2022 because I had too many other expenses I had to pay for otherwise. Fortunately, that was offset by all the free cash we had. But I'd love to get back into it. But for the moment, we do have capital. We have like the capital expense line already created into general government.
And so you're saying that this increase of 331,747 is getting paid from, and you
No, yeah, it's confusing. So it's three ways, four ways, excuse me, four ways. $215,000, which is a combination of local receipts and local aid, which comes from the state.
Mhm.
I don't remember I don't remember the split between those two. And then $100,000 of released overlay. That's a one time.
right.
And then 16,344, which is related to that indirect cost that Justin was referring to earlier about those.
We're taking it out of water, sewer, and
because
human.
it pays
Right.
because a lot of those salaries are split.
Okay, I'm just wondering if in the article, I guess we'll just have to do it in our comments and make sure people understand, but it like that we've accounted for this, in other words, like it's not a new, do you know what I'm saying? Like
Accounted for
it's a
what?
balanced, yeah, it's balanced in our budget, this 331. You found it in other places.
So again, I had
additional-
COVID bearing when I wrote those comments, but I tried to point out that first, as we always do, we start with revenue. And then I pointed out how much revenue we collected. And so, yeah, someone would have to do the math and check that.
So, that's what I'm saying, that like often
Yeah.
we see the spending and then we see the revenue and we see that they equal somewhere, as opposed to this just seems like, well, where's this 331 coming from? Like it's an additional taxation or something. Am I making sense?
You could think that. So the obligation of the select board is through, through tax recap is to raise and appropriate a certain amount of money. So we, or through other means, right? So whether it be grants or otherwise. But I point out in the sponsor comments how the math adds up. So if you,
Right.
in this case, it's through, taxes, but I'm not talking about property taxes. I'm talking about local receipts, which is,
Right.
yeah. And then,
I guess my point is just how to like show it visually that these are new, these are all increases to the budget, but they have been accounted for already.
can you do me a favor and
With-
scroll to the very bottom, because there's an appendix. So I want to
Oh,
see.
maybe
if the-
that's, yeah.
I want to
that
see
would
if the
probably
appendix
be-
includes a breakdown. Wait, yes. So, we're not going to change any of there you go. So yeah, so it'll
Okay.
probably scroll up a little bit. So, okay, so see where it says education, less assessments, general government. So you'll see change. This has not been updated. You'll see a change in that because we got more state funds. And then you'll see a change in local receipts. See where it says $2.83 million for local receipts? You'll see a change in that amount of money for what the new local receipts is. And then the far
Okay.
right column is the variance. So it does
So
take,
this will equal,
or it'll be part of that money that added up to $215,000.
right, okay.
Yeah.
We'll just make sure it's understood, I guess.
I just that hasn't been updated yet, but yeah.
Okay.
Right. No, and I would, of course, just like Justin said, we always appreciate the finance committee translating the
Yeah,
jargon.
I want to make sure that it's clear to town meeting voters that it's there, obviously, if we were taking it out of, say, the schools or, then it would be there as a decrease. So I just want to be sure that everybody understands that this is not, these increases are not then cutting
No.
another department's budget or
No.
something. Do you see what I
No.
mean? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll make it clear. We'll get there. Natasha, you had a comment or question on this article.
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, it went in a somewhat related, just clarity perspective. I know that at the all-town meeting we had in the spring, they had a separate line allocation for PEG access. It was $366,434. And I know this came up last year as just a little bit confusing because on this amended, it doesn't have that separate line, but
Right.
just doing the math, it's in the general government. Because really the general government budget, which was approved before, was 33,57110. So I'm wondering, is it possible to retain that PEG access line
Sure.
to so
I
don't
would
know.
do that. I see what you're saying, Natasha, and I don't want to add to any confusion. So I would say that this should look the same as the one we appropriated at annual town meeting.
No problem.
Thanks. And I only did it because I know the math and this came up last year, but someone who
Yeah.
maybe isn't, they might look at the general government from last time and it's a different
Right.
number.
And be like, yeah, right. That's not what we appropriated under general government. And certainly,
Right.
right. Yeah, no,
Right.
I agree with you.
Okay.
Keep it.
Thanks. Yeah, as much as unless there's a reason why, and that would be my other question. If there's a reason why we would want to lump it in, I just didn't understand if there was.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll let you know
Thanks.
if there was, but I think it was just, we just drafted this.
FinCom thoughts, questions for Greg? Okay.
What?
So-
You grilled Justin. No, I don't want the, I'm all good with this. Besides, I think if you have poor Megan on the phone still, so I'm good. I'm good.
I'm trying to think,
Well, I don't want Greg to feel bad
No, I
about
feel
not getting
great.
questions.
sure, let's,
So,
It's late.
don't let him be left out. Sorry, I'm just looking and making sure if there was
So
any other.
Maybe I should ask Greg about my golf course questions.
Is it on the agenda, Madam Chair?
It's not on the agenda, Madam Chair. No. Um,
Member,
if I,
member comments are coming up real quick.
Yep. And I fully appreciate putting it in there and making a note to have a further conversation, but I think I would prefer to stick to STM for now. And
Me too.
okay. All right, good. So if there are no further questions for Greg, I think we can just move ahead with some of our housekeeping and work before we are done with this meeting, and we can let any other town employees who are still on the line.
Did you
Get
have any
off.
questions for Megan? I'm sorry. I hate asking this because it's late for Megan, but
No,
did,
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, my
Yeah.
camera's not working. I'm on a loaner laptop.
That's okay.
Here. But I did submit the article regarding the
Oh, the
community
marijuana.
impact funds. Yeah, and I thought that might get some questions, so I wanted
Thank
to.
you. I knew there was one we hadn't looked at yet. Sorry, I missed it in
Okay.
my scrolling.
Thank you
This
so
one-
much.
this-
Megan, you're
Yeah.
so, you've been on for that?
yeah, she's been on for a while.
Oh,
That's okay. It's all
Megan.
good.
This one doesn't really need any discussion. I mean, really.
Really?
No, I think it
Oops.
does a little bit. So I went to the select board meeting where they discussed it. And I think it is important to note that Megan talked about the fact that, and she can probably give a little more context, but the state is coming through and changing these marijuana impact amounts and things. This sort of cash cow that we have in these is not going to be there forever.
Right.
And they are also getting very careful about how these are spent and making sure they aren't just, hey, we have this free money from marijuana. They have to be spent on things that were impacted in the town potentially by having the marijuana establishments. So Megan is doing a lot to be sure that we can't get sued or something on how we use these funds. And so, and the
So-
way that this is written, it's a little, it's not for specific,
So all this is doing
projects
is
yet.
segregating those funds so that the town can demonstrate and tie expenses that are going against the impact fees to a specific fund. Is that correct,
Well,
Megan?
Yes, I mean, so we really have been trying to be on the straight and narrow for this since the beginning. And, we were allowed to create a stabilization fund, so we did that. So every penny we got went right in there. And, town meeting voted it in. And now we're asking town meeting to vote it out because as, Alana, you mentioned here, there is a little urgency now to allocate these funds to something because there's going to be a lot of eyes looking at them. And, what that means going forward, we're working on. But right now we have this in the bank and there are needs, there are impacts, I believe. And so my recommendation is to not wait on this and to move them to a place where they can be expended in a, transparent and appropriate way to balance the impacts of the shops in our downtown.
So my question is, would town meeting be essentially approving a fund that can be spent at the discretion of the select board without further approval of town meeting voters?
That's a good question, Kevin. So it's not technically a fund, it would be an article. That's what our town accountant has recommended. And that the purpose would be for, the points that I kind of mentioned here, beautification, infrastructure improvements, etc. And then, yes, I would recommend an additional layer of review by the select board. And how I'm envisioning doing it is to have, an application process so that folks either town, because town staff, we have projects we need to do. You know, we need to replace the signage for parking downtown. That's about $50,000. We have a plan. It's, you know, part of parking authority, parking management plan. So, you know, we want to be able to pitch that to the select board. And we've had community input to that plan. And then have them look at it in the context of what we're trying to do downtown and approve it. So I'd be careful about saying, you know, no other approval, because I am sure that weight will be given to projects that have had community input along the way and would have kind of a wider kind of thought process about, you know, how it matches our master plan, how it matches plans that have already been looked at by community members.
But to be clear, the expenditure of these funds would not require town meeting approval.
The specific expenditures.
Yes.
No. And it says expended under the direction
Right.
of the select board.
And then,
So-
yes, correct.
So we are approving taking this out of a stabilization fund and putting it in a fund that is accessible so that
be
we can
spent.
spend it.
Yeah, because right now we can't touch it until town meeting approves it to be moved out.
Any other questions for Megan on this one? Okay. Megan, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
I
Thank you
am
very much.
Thank you,
If
Megan.
I had known you, I should have put you on and put you like right ahead of Justin.
That's
in
fine.
the-
It's always good to listen in, and I haven't been to a meeting in a while. So thank you very much for your thorough discussion. And if any other questions come up as you look these over, you know, please let me know and I'm happy to answer them. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank
Thanks,
you, Greg,
Megan.
for being here. Glad you're feeling better. And, you know, anything that changes, please send me right away because we're under the gun.
Are you all set with me then, Madam Chair? Is that what you're implying?
Yes, unless anyone else has any questions for Greg before we let
I
him
don't.
get. Okay,
All right, cool. Thank you.
thank you so
everyone.
much. All right, Finance Committee. So I made a little list just for our purposes. And I figured we could decide if some of these we can go ahead and vote on this evening and make sure we have the comment, who's going to do comments for which ones and which ones we want to hold off on
Have,
to
have
vote on
an-
for
have
next.
any of these been voted on by the select board? Because I didn't think that they had voted on these.
No, I don't no, the warrant was just drafted, so, and they vote on the warrant as a whole generally, don't they?
Well,
So
so
no.
so they vote on the individual, they vote on the individual controls,
Okay,
and they
hold on.
forward them to us.
Let me,
But my impression is that they have not voted these yet.
well, I think I asked that question though, if it's a problem if we do it in the reverse, because we've had this issue before where our meetings and their meetings, the way that they,
That's, you know, then that's the select board's issue.
right, so I'm just asking, are you saying that we should not vote on any because the select board hasn't
No,
yet?
what I'm saying
Oh,
is
okay.
there's no article until the select board has voted the article. There's nothing for us to vote on.
Yeah,
Okay, so you're saying we do have to wait until for voting? Okay,
Well, so from a practical perspective, if they change it, if they modify it, which you know, of
Right.
course, for example, Article number 5 is going to get changed. Okay. You know, before it's final, the
Okay.
town budget. But the point is that until they vote to put it on the warrant, then it's not not on the warrant. Now, I realize, you know, that they think that they're going to put these on. But you know, probably better than any of us, that, you know, this has been very much a moving target.
Yeah.
So if you're
Okay,
aware
so-
that they voted on it, then that's one thing. I'm fine with that. But if they have not voted it, we don't really have anything to vote on.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be comfortable voting on an article that could possibly be a moving target. Lest that, you know, I mean, at the very least, if they
Well,
change,
so the reality is, Kevin, there have been times when there has been an article forwarded to us. We have voted on it, and then the select board has revised it and sent it to us, and we have voted on it again.
Right.
So the moving target part of it is certainly a concern.
As far as I know, and I'm looking at their last meeting, which had
Yeah,
the
I
articles
attended
on
that.
it, it said action recommended, review list of developing
Yep.
articles and possible articles. So I do not believe that they took that they have voted on any yet.
Yeah, and I get the fact that they have a lot of things going on, but the fact that they have a lot of things going on does not mean we should be taking steps, you know, out of order in order to accommodate the fact that the warrant is still very much in flux.
yeah, I think
Okay.
we have to respect the process on this.
All right. I mean,
Sorry,
honestly,
if I'd known you were going to be asking us to vote, I would have asked us to confirm with Greg, and I'm pretty sure that, you know.
no, I think you're correct. I don't remember it actually, you know, and as I said, the draft of the warrant just came out literally today. So they haven't seen it in its entirety, certainly.
They've seen the individual
They've
controls.
seen the, yes, yeah,
And they could have voted on the controls, but
Yeah.
they have not.
but I don't, not to my knowledge, no.
So,
So with that being said, why we are missing a couple of our members, but I think would it make sense to at least assign
correct.
some of the other
Well,
comments so that we could
we
hopefully,
can assign them. We can certainly assign them.
yeah.
Now, I know I had signed up for 2 and 3 last time.
Mhm.
2 and 3 are actually, you know, let's see here, are actually pretty, you know, pretty easy. You know,
Yep.
they're pretty pro forma. I'm
Mhm.
happy to take on the whole bleacher repairs thing, which
Okay.
probably is more complicated.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Ken. I was not looking forward to having to wade through all that, especially as a newbie here.
And Katie, yours got taken off.
I,
You were
I
gonna-
was just looking, I was like, it's
Yeah,
not
no.
on here.
yours,
Yeah.
yours
So
is
she
getting
can-
pushed to ATM so that we have more time with that one.
So there you go, Katie. You can do 2 and 3. Those are easy. Those are easy.
Oh, are you saying you don't want to do 2 and 3, Ken?
I'm not doing 2 and 3 and 6. I'm not
Oh.
doing half of
Oh,
the.
I thought it
Oh,
sounded like
okay.
you were.
I thought you were-
more.
Well,
No,
geez.
no.
All right,
No,
fine.
I'm not that nice of a guy. I'm nice enough to take on 6,
Okay, all right.
but I'm gonna give up 2 and 3.
I was just
Katie,
thinking 9 sounded easy.
okay, you want to do 9?
9 is easy.
Okay,
I'll take on 4A because I think I was here when Justin was talking about all the water
So
supply
that
and
would
all
be
the. community-
7.
I'm sorry, yeah,
okay,
7. Yep, I would take on 7 because I was there
Okay.
for the conversation.
And there he's got 8 too. There you go.
yeah, and you're okay with that, with those 2, Kevin? Having-
I am okay with those 2.
Okay, great.
Just as a heads up, I do have concerns about Article 4 and Article 5. I don't know if that means I should own the writing of the comments, but I do have some concerns to possibly be articulated for Articles 4 and Article 5.
Okay,
Well, you already have 2. I mean, in practical.
yeah, that's
in
fine.
practical, we have Jill who is silently sitting there.
Jill, do you want to do 2 and 3? Or do you want to do marijuana?
I love when a meeting says, do you want to do marijuana? I just want to throw that out there. Thank you for framing it that way.
2022.
I know, right?
Illegal.
Yeah.
I didn't
There
say
we
anything
go.
illegal.
I am very proud
Circle
to be a
double
me-
muted here.
Sorry. What are you thinking, Jillian? What would you like to write the comments for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to pick up what we need here.
You can do 2
All
or
right,
I
3.
do have
You
to
can
go
do,
soon. The dog's gotta go out, so.
you can do 2 or
Why
3,
don't-
or you could do
Why don't you
4.
do the marijuana, because you were here to listen with Megan, and I'm sure Peter can do 2 and 3.
That's right.
That's a
Okay.
good idea.
I'm going ahead and I'm gonna,
Peter is skating on this.
Yeah.
When
this
is
town
this
meeting.
due?
it would be good if if our next meeting, if we could have some drafts, but we may need to change, obviously you're gonna write them as if we were, generally speaking, my guess is we're gonna write these as if we were to recommend them. However, if we end up in discussion with voting, not recommending them, then they would have to change.
So our next meeting is the 26th.
Yes, and that is the last meeting before the deadline for printing. But
Yeah,
if we can't, we may not be able to have all of these voted and comments done at one meeting. That seems like a tall order. So
so
we'll do the best we can.
just as a reminder,
Mhm.
our the next meeting, the 26th,
Yes.
is the last meeting we would have before our public hearing. Unless we add a meeting on the 3rd.
On the 3rd, yes, which we had talked about the potential of needing.
And we were gonna wait.
Yeah, I think we'll wait till the 26th to make that call. See how we're doing. If we just have a few more comments to like air out after public hearing, I don't think that would be a problem to do in one meeting. But if we're really in the thick of it, because a lot of stuff has changed, then we may need an additional meeting.
Just from a practical perspective, I think, it would be good to have comments, even if they were just an initial draft at the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that would then, give us a chance to then decide sort of where we are on these.
Mhm.
Some of these, like 5, I'm guessing we are not going to have 5 in time because
Right.
maybe they'll get it finalized by the next
Right.
select board meeting, but
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these I think we're okay on. I mean, there certainly may be some language we want to put in the comments. But I think, number 1, I think is pretty standard. 2 and 3, as you said, I don't think that should be not so bad. The marijuana, there may be some things to put in the comments, but
As I said, I do have
So.
concerns. I do have concerns about 4.
okay.
I do want to have a little bit of discussion about 4 because I do have some concerns about it.
Oh yeah, we'll go through and discuss them all before voting
Yep.
our recommendation,
So
and
just-
that will, that can add to the comment section. I am very much in favor of comments like saying that we were not unanimous on the decision, things of that nature. So absolutely, we will, we'll go through them all before we.
so when is the deadline for comments for it to be in the printed warrant?
The 26th or the 27th. I think I told them make it the 27th, or I would give them to them like first thing in the morning on the 27th, because I
Yeah.
think, but it's all a little dicey right now because Becky is the one that like makes these timelines and knows the systems, and she's not there, and so I don't know who's ending up doing the printing, and so
Well, it's dicey too, because the select board hasn't voted these things.
yeah.
I mean, so.
Yeah.
So, I mean, until we get the vote, as you well know, the list of articles has changed immeasurably with some being, put off until ATM. So,
Right.
so,
And like we said, the CPC may want to change theirs. So yeah, there's a lot of,
And with that, it's a big difference between them asking for 5,000 and them asking for like 30 or 50. Like
Yeah,
that has a huge impact, I think, on my disposition towards this article.
yeah.
well, so to your point, Alana, we
Mhm.
should be writing these as though we're going to approve them. We can modify them when we take a vote.
Yes.
Certainly, but typically, unless we know that we are not going to, unless we've already through our discussions, gotten the point of knowing that we're not gonna,
Right.
agree,
Mhm.
recommend, excuse me,
Yep.
then we generally have written the comments as though we will vote to recommend and then modified as necessary.
Yes.
So,
Okay, so let's go ahead and I will send this document just so everybody has
great.
it, but those are your assignments. You can certainly, any of new members, if you're not sure about the comments, I'm sure you've read some of ours in the past, but go ahead and look up some previous warrants and kind of get a feel. Brevity is, not, you don't want them to be so long that people don't read them and get confused or have them be, but we do certainly make sure that we make sure the points that we want to get across to town meeting voters do get across, but we're not writing, pages in general. Okay, moving on in our agenda, let's look at the minutes from our last meeting. I will make these a little bigger. That's tiny. I'll give everyone a minute. These were just sent around today, so if you need to take a look at them for a minute, that's fine.
Can you go back to 2 for a second?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Never mind. I see it now. Thanks.
Item 3.
Yep.
Does anyone recall the executive branch saying that they considered competitors? Because I do not recall them saying that other providers were considered.
Oh, I think
Maybe it would be competitors would be considered, but didn't compete.
I would say there was only one reply to the request for proposal.
There was no request for proposal though, because
Oh, sorry, what am I looking at?
This is item.
Trash. Oh, sorry, I was thinking of, sorry.
This is about the trash. This is the big thing why they keep emphasizing that state law does not require an RFP. And my understanding is that this was a sole source contract where only EL Harvey was considered. Maybe we could strike that and ask that in a follow-up, and maybe we could strike that and ask that in our follow-up, because that was the basis for my red flag. But if we're not sure about that, I would move that we strike that from the record and then issue issue something when we have a definitive answer.
Yep.
Because unless someone recalls that they said like competitors were considered, because I heard the answer to the question that, E.L. Harvey was the only one
No.
considered.
Well, I think, and I wrote that as, I don't know if it was Greg or Justin, but that they would be considered, but they didn't compete. Like there was no other bids or.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
That was
So
renewal
I will
based.
We can
say
take that out.
trash-
That's not,
trash collection is exempt from the normal RFP procurement process. Competition in this sector is
yeah, that sounds good.
and then we can just say
We could probably take out the rest up until bleachers.
yeah.
I would move that we take out the rest. I think,
Okay.
I think a lot of this is gonna come up in discussion after
Yeah.
SCTM, because I do
Yeah.
think we do have to have because I have major concerns about the process of how we got there.
Yeah. All right, any further comments or corrections? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Oh, could you go
Is
just back down?
4A supposed to be 5? Sorry. Is 4A supposed to be 5K, or was that the 5 million one we talked about today?
No, it's only
Uh,
5,000. Oh,
Oh, already got it.
oh, that could be wrong. 5,000 seems really small, but
Is this, sorry, DPW,
I remember 5K from the farm project, but I thought the other one might be a slightly different
this
number.
is the,
But I don't remember what it is.
this is the 5 million, isn't it?
I don't think we talked about that last week.
I don't think we talked about it either. So I don't know what the 5K was for. It must be the 5 million. I mean, because did Ken take that on? Maybe it got scratched. I don't know.
I don't know what the part about what the 5K will do. I think what, this already spent, I think, like he was talking about tonight, there's phase 1 is already done. And so I don't know if he was talking about that part or what. I don't remember the
I think-
specifics.
I think just the first 2 sentences on this are fine.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Or we can keep, we noted that this was part of a longer term plan.
I think that would be good.
I don't think Ken was. We'll take on, oh, right, because you were gonna do, right, and then we changed it. So yeah, that's fine. That was
Okay.
accurate for this time.
Sorry, my 8 pages of notes took a while to run.
That's okay. All right, anything else on these?
I don't think you hear anybody complaining about it, Katie, right?
No,
Everybody
nope,
knows
it's all
better.
good.
Well, I will first the motion to approve the minutes for August 29th.
All right, do I have a second?
I will second.
All right, any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote
Just as
Oh.
a formality, it would be
Yep.
as amended.
as amended.
Ah, yes, okay.
All right, then Kevin,
Aye.
Ken,
Yes.
Katie,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well. Thank you so much for those, Katie.
Mhm.
And all right, updates from chair and members. I'm going to go ahead and defer because it's late and I think I've covered most of the things in our discussion with Justin and Greg. So other members, Ken, I think you wanted to say a few words in this
Yeah, I
section.
just, again, in the interest of keeping the discussion short, I had reached out to individually to some members of the select board to talk about the art space. And again, just an attempt to keep it short, I said I'm reaching out as one member of the finance committee, not on behalf of the board, but just to express the fact that I think, there was some misunderstanding because in the discussion, they had talked about that, their interpretation of our communication was that somehow we wanted negotiation to be in an open meeting. And I clarified through the discussion that we were really talking about the fact that there was a larger decision about the disposition of the building, about whether to sell it or to lease it, whether to put it out for a general lease, or what they did, in fact, is put out an RFP that had a very restricted set of qualifications, and that while the negotiations that they have between the select board and the art and art space were certainly appropriately done within executive session, that the more general discussion about why they were deciding to lease versus sell or what have you was not really appropriate for executive session. Executive session is very specific on negotiations, but the general decision on disposition really needed to be an open. All three of the members I talked to individually, came to understanding, and I know that they had an executive session last week. Obviously, I wasn't there, don't know what was discussed, but I'm hoping that what will come out of this is what we had sort of envisioned, in terms of making sure that people across the community understood, how this is happening. I guess my main point is that, Art Space is looking to get a long-term lease so that they can invest money. The people who donate that money are going to be expecting that money to be used for the long term. So we're about to make a decision as a town to lease, to this, body, technically for 10 years, but realistically for a longer period of time. And as I said to them, as one individual, I think that needs to be a conversation with the community. So I think I feel as though it was understood. Don't know what action they're going to take, individually or collectively, but I think that they understand that discussion, they're certainly, I certainly expect they'll continue the negotiations in executive session, but once those are done, then, move to have a larger discussion. And at that point, then, the members of the Maynard community can come to hear that, to make comment or what have you, and then, speak now or forever hold your peace, I guess. So the other issue is around the golf course. I think, we've touched on this a couple of times. Things are churning and brewing relative to the disposition of the golf course. I don't want to take that discussion now, but that is something I think we do need to turn our attention to. Much more complex than what we're prepared to, the issues are much more complex than we have expertise. But town meeting voters are going to be wanting to understand the expenditures that are being proposed for that, or that are at least tentatively being proposed. And so I think we need to educate ourselves on that one too. So those were the two things. Thank you.
Can
Okay.
can I ask Ken a question?
Sure.
So what have you heard? Because I've been going to the CPC meetings, and the priority in those meetings has been the Marble Farm. The golf course, I mean, I brought it up, and I could give my update if you want, but I do have an update because I did make the CPC aware of your thoughts in particular. I said some members were thinking X, Y, and Z. But I'm wondering as to like what you have heard, like where is this information coming from, so that I can, I could possibly follow up on, or look to see like what's going, or even ask about it, because so far I have not heard any sort of movement on the golf course, and maybe that happened like before I came on board.
So there were the information I have primarily comes from two meetings. One where they had an expert come in and explain why the agreement they had was not, it was not properly done. And then a more recent one where they talked, I think I had forwarded, Kevin, to you some materials that they had sent out. And so that was that meeting as well that they were discussing. But the problem is that they are discussing along one option. And I think as a town, we need to understand what our options are. And this is likely to require, probably a special town council to not, obviously that's not what we would hire, but it would certainly be something that would go to the select board to make a decision on hiring a special town council. But given what at that discussion with the expert, what he was talking about doing in terms of the town reimbursing them at market rate for the at current market rate for the clubhouse, that to me raised all kinds of red flags. So
yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
So I have not heard. Okay. Let me ask the chair permission to give my update.
Yeah.
Okay. As a kind of,
go ahead. Sure.
so I met with the CPC. I believe it was the last meeting. I listened in. There was actually not a lot of updates. It was just more of a clarification on Marble Farm. Was the primary discussion. I did bring up the subject of the golf course. I did notify the CPC that we had discussed the golf course, and they inquired as to what we discussed. I told them that essentially the members were talking about, we had not taken a vote, but members were discussing about ensuring that town meeting voters have a say in the disposition of the golf course, and that certain members felt that Article 97, invoking Article 97, should be on the table and should be considered.
Okay.
And they did have a reply to which they said, I think the exact words was not going to happen in regards to Article 97. They did later acknowledge that maybe the clubhouse could be, but the full golf course, they were adamantly, at least the one individual, I believe was the chair, was adamantly against and said it was not going to happen because of restrictions of CPA funding. And so Article 97 is like open space law. There's another governing statute, which is the Community Preservation Act. And I did some follow-up research based on their comments. And what I found regarding the Community Preservation Act is that any sale of a property that was funded with CPA funds, the proceeds of that sale have to go back in the CPA fund. So you couldn't like sell the
You
golf
can't
course
sell it, right?
and then
Right.
move that money into the general fund. So I
Correct.
believe that was the restriction they're referring to, but that would be
Okay.
speculation on my part, but that's based on my research. I
Okay.
also found the original warrant, thanks to the Maynard Historical Society. So
Okay.
I could email it to you, but if you go on the Maynard
Yeah.
Historical Society, you can look up the original warrant. It's not on the town website. Now I
What
haven't,
year was it? Do you know what
2000
year?
2011.
Okay.
And what I found is I did find an article that did fund the purchase of the golf course, except it was entirely CPA funds.
Okay. So there wasn't that. They thought that the town had maybe kicked in some for
Yeah,
but it doesn't appear that that's the case.
So
I mean-
what is on the warrant and what actually gets passed? You know, that would be something to go to the town clerk and find out what
Okay.
actually,
Right.
got passed. And the one thing I guess I would say is, it was clear when the expert came in and talked to look, there's a lot of arcane language and
Mhm.
restrictions and limitations and conditions around the use of CPA money. And I think it's frankly, it is almost as Byzantine as school system budgets are, not quite, but almost. And I'm just saying, I think what happened with the golf course is complex enough that it requires somebody with expertise to unwrap it. And I think that's probably beyond a volunteer committee to do.
Right.
And that I would include the, not just the CPC in that, but the FinCom, the select board, that really
Yeah.
requires somebody to unpack that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the one takeaway I would do from this is that if there's any, I know it's probably already voted, but I would advise town meeting voters that any CPA funding, once it goes into that fund, it never comes out. Like, it only comes out via CPA project. So there's no way, once you decide to put money into a CPA fund, there's really no way to undo that decision.
Yeah.
At least according to my
Okay.
my reading of the Community Preservation Act. Never mind
Yeah.
all the arcane rules that we have to go through.
Right.
But like, in hindsight, they really should have told when they voted on the golf course, they really should have told people that, like, hey, once you vote on this, there's no turning back. Like,
Yeah.
it's very
Okay.
difficult to roll back the clock on that.
All right. Did you have any other updates? I will
think-
definitely put the golf course and that type on a future agenda. I have that noted.
Yeah, I'm just checking just the thing. I think I already made the chair aware, but I was checking the YouTube. And I don't
Yep.
think all of our meetings are uploaded. I noticed the August 29th meeting was uploaded, but
Yep.
the prior meeting was May 9th, and I seem to recall we had a meeting before that.
Yep, I thought I had sent him a reminder for the ones that haven't yet been uploaded. I've also talked to Megan and Greg. There may be something that needs to happen, particularly in the summer, because Mark Manazian is a teacher, and him doing these things in the summer, it appeared to just not be quite as updated as the other times of the year, which, so we may need to go look at that as a procedural thing. So that's it's on the radar.
So, and just my things that I want to see on the agenda, the golf course, definitely, I think I would
Mhm.
second Ken. Oh, and on that, I also think we need to have a very extensive discussion about how we arrived at this trash contract.
Yep.
Because as I said, like, in 17 years of working in industry, like, no sole source contract goes through and gets approved without extensive scrutiny. It is a major financial red flag. Only under extraordinary circumstances is like stuff like that go through. I think that even goes
Okay.
through the government. But anyways, I'll save
All right.
I'll save my comments for later. And then the third
Mhm.
item, I think we have to have we have to ascertain the financial situation regarding our infrastructure. Like, I want to know what issues, what pieces of infrastructure or capital equipment is out there that's at the tail end of the life, because that is a major financial risk.
Yep, and I think that's going to be, and I had this as another agenda item post STM, is to have a joint meeting with the Capcom, because that was part of what they have been doing, is getting that information so that they can make recommendations on what is needed most urgently.
I would also like to interview DPW again, the DPW director, because I want to, because I recall earlier this year he was talking, I think for annual town meeting, he asked for supervisory staff to oversee the maintenance of the fields and the maintenance of the fields and the bleachers. And I don't know if he got that supervisory staff, but I would like to see, like, I would like to understand further who is overseeing the maintenance of our infrastructure, like what was being overseen, and like what walkthroughs are being done, and what monitoring of the status of our infrastructure is going on.
Okay.
Because I am a little bit concerned about because again, Justin said that he didn't have the staffing to properly oversee it. So I'm concerned about the oversight of that work being done. And
that's also something that may come up in budget discussions. We do see all of the department heads during budget discussions for their proposals. So something like maintenance staff and that staffing level would be possibly part of that discussion.
As the liaison, could I send you a list of questions that I would have for in that regard on that topic? Or
sure.
I mean, I could go either way. I mean, I could send you a list of questions, or if we want to have a hearing on that. But I feel like we should look into see like how DPW is doing, and if they are really overwhelmed that they are not able to properly monitor or oversee maintenance on the infrastructure.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yep.
I gotta go. The dog's gonna have an accident.
No problem. Thank you, Jillian.
Good night.
Good night. I know sometimes even if we are going to have a meeting, it's always helpful for our staff to know what it is, what kinds of information we're looking for. So, and they can research it ahead of time. So if you want to send any questions, that's sure. Perfectly fine.
I'll follow the questions if you want to ask them yourself, or if you want to bring them in again. I mean, all this is after special town meeting, of course. Like, we're going to have our hands full.
Sure. Katie, any updates from you?
Unmute. I'm eating a late dinner.
Oh, that's right.
No, one of the groups that I'm on met. They had to change their meeting, and they're actually meeting at 7 o'clock tonight. So I'm gonna have to go back and read the minutes. So more to come on that.
Is that the building committee?
They haven't had building committee hasn't had a meeting since the last time.
Oh, it's one of the. Oh, that's right. There were several meetings tonight, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the bylaw. It might be the bylaw. I should know which one it is. John.
I think there was a capital planning committee meeting
that might have been
at 7:30, which is actually talking about the bleachers. And I was like, where do I go? But
then, no.
I know.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna have to read the meeting minutes for that one.
I did have a question. I did have a question for Ken that I just remembered.
Okay.
The follow-up regarding the mold in the schools. Maybe Natasha can answer that, although not on the hook. But I'm just wondering if any follow-up has been done. I mean, that remains a.
I've not followed up. I do need to follow up with the school system about that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Anything else? Thank you so much, everybody. Really productive meeting, and sorry it went so late, but we will work on your comments, and I will see you on the 26th. Okay. Oh, sorry. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
Okay. Then a roll call vote. Kevin,
Aye.
Ken,
Yes.
Katie,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well at 10:22. Thank you so much, everybody.
I have a
Have a
good
good
night.
week.
Thank you.
Night all. Bye.
Good night.